Welcome to the Wealthsteading Podcast. This is episode 500. Today is November 21st, 2025. I'm your host, John Pagliano. I'm also the founder and money manager at investablewealth.com. Well, in recognition of the 500th episode of this podcast, I've consolidated the original 10 episodes, which constitute the 10 wealth building principles that started this podcast and which were the thought process and the methodology of how I've built my wealth over the years. These 10 episodes have always been archived at the website, but they've never been put together in one succinct location before. So here they are. Before you listen, let me preface these episodes with a couple thoughts. When the podcast first started, one of the negative reviews I received was someone that said that, hey, this was a nice attempt, but nothing new. Well, that's just the point. There is nothing new to building wealth. Wealth building is an eternal principle. It follows the natural laws, just like any law of physics or gravity. If you obey certain principles, you'll get repeatable results. And as you listen to these episodes, you'll not only hear a recurring theme, but hopefully you'll recognize that this message hasn't changed much over the past more than 11 years from when I first recorded this message back on Independence Day of 2014. And not being new is also a key point of wealth building, which is repetition. I think in our modern society of the never-ending 24-hour news cycle, which is magnified by being able to desk scroll, that people have really missed the benefit of hearing a consistent message over and over again. As a young man, when I was building my wealth, I had a dozen or so cassette tapes that I would listen to over and over again while I was driving in my car, repeating the same message, listening to it so many times that I'd wear out those cassette tapes and have to buy new ones. I'd encourage you to do the same thing with this episode. Listen to the message over and over again. Let it resonate. Pick up the things that are important to you and then put them into action. Now, in terms of repetition, and to carry on that tradition of the old cassette tape quality, and to preserve the nostalgia of the message, these following podcasts have not been digitally remastered. They haven't been augmented by artificial intelligence. They're just the pure, uncut audio from over 11 years ago. So sit back, relax, and enjoy over 3.5 hours of pure, wealth-steading, wealth-building wisdom.
Welcome to the first episode of the Wealthsteading Podcast. I'm your host, John Pagliano. I'm the money manager and founder of investablewealth.com. The first 10 episodes of this podcast are going to be dedicated to the principles of building wealth. These episodes will remain on the website and they'll be there as a reference so new listeners can start at the beginning principles, because wealth is a process. It's something that just doesn't happen overnight. So we want to leave these principles up so that new people can understand what they are. And then those of you that have been listening for quite a while will still be able to go back and reference these 10 principles, because each episode is going to examine and discuss the news and events of the day. And we're going to do that through the filter and through the analysis of these 10 wealth building principles. So each episode we'll be going through and we'll be applying these principles so that you can learn how to make them work in your life so that you can continue to build your wealth. Let me first talk about the name of this podcast. It's called the Wealthsteading Podcast. Now, I chose that name because I want you to think about the old phrase of homesteading. When people homesteaded, a family got together, they owned or worked a small piece of land, usually only a couple acres, and they nurtured and they developed and they built that land up to where it could sustain their family. And that's why I chose Wealthsteading as the name of this podcast and as a philosophy I want you to put into your life. Because today in the 21st century, we may not be going back and all living off of an acre or two of land, but we should all strive to be living off of our assets. We should all strive to be able to nurture and build our wealth so that it can get to a certain point where we have enough money where we can put that money to work for us, and that money pays us dividends and interest and capital gains so that we can live off of it. We can support a family. Now, that doesn't mean you don't work. That doesn't mean you don't have a job. But what it does mean is you have the choice. And that's what wealth steading is all about. Now, whether you're just trying to scrape together your first few dollars to build your emergency fund, or if you already have a $5 million portfolio and you're trying to understand how to preserve that, this podcast is for you. We're not only going to cover the basics, we're also going to talk about in-depth things, and we're also going to talk about the overall principles of wealth so that you can pass those along and educate people in your life, your loved ones, your spouse, your children, your neighbors. Wealth only works in a capitalist society, in a free market society, if it's something that everybody can aspire to. And that's why it's important that you not only possess wealth, but that you're able to share that knowledge and help other people attain wealth as well. So every episode will be dedicated to building, preserving, and helping you grow your wealth. Well, let's get started right now with the first principle. I want to start off with a question. What is wealth? Well, a lot of people would say maybe that's just money or having a lot of money. But the first principle of wealth building is that wealth is freedom. That's right, I said freedom. Now you can think of that in terms of freedom in terms of liberty, freedom in terms of being independent. I don't care what phrase you attach to that, but it's all about you being able to make your own decisions. And before we talk about freedom, let's step back and take a look at the opposite of that. Let's look at slavery. Consider a society that has slaves. Someone owns a slave. That slave is this person's property, and the slave is given no choice. I remember when I would visit China on business, and I had a friend that would translate for me. He was Taiwanese, and when we were in China, it was a very restricted, although not a full slave economy, it was a very restricted economy. And I would ask him things, well, why do you do this, or how do you do this, or how do you make that choice? And his answer would always be the same. It would be, you have no choice. It was always, you have no choice. When I asked him what university he chose to study at, he told me what it was, and he said he had no choice. When I asked him what career he decided to study, to go into, he told me he had no choice. And so that was his reply when he thought about China. In China, you had no choice. Well, slavery works a lot like that, right? If you're a slave, you are assigned a job. You're assigned work. You don't get to pick what you want. You don't get to pick your career. You're given a job, and for doing that job, you're provided food and shelter and little more. So that's what a slave is. That's what a slave is. 100% of his time is taken up by his slave owner. Now think about you. Are you in a job that you enjoy? Are you in a job that you hate? Are you stuck in that job because you got bills to pay and you can't get out of it? What's your tax rate? Are you paying 20, 25, 30, 50%? Think about it. Think about all the taxes you pay in your life. Not only your payroll, not only your standard income tax, but then you have real estate tax, you have sales tax, you have the payroll tax where either you or your employer are paying about 16, 17% for Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, workman's compensation. So right off the bat, half of your income is taken away from you in taxes. What's that make you? That makes you 50% a slave. So what do you do with the other 50% of your money? Are you burdened with a high mortgage? Do you have a car payment? Do you have outrageous health insurance premiums? Do you have a massive credit card debt that you're just making the minimum payments on? Chances are, if you're like most Americans, you're a slave. Oh, you may have 5%, 2%, 1% of discretionary income, but for the most part, at the end of the month, you're broke. All your money has gone to just provide yourself with food and shelter, maybe some entertainment. So are you any better off than a slave? I would argue that you're not. And that's the purpose of this podcast, and that's a purpose for you to understand the first wealth building principle. Wealth is freedom. You don't save and work to make money just to have money, just so you can buy things, just so you can put yourself further into slavery. You acquire wealth so that you can have freedom. What kind of freedom? Freedom to work, freedom to have the job that you want, freedom to maybe be retired, maybe freedom to have spend your time on a hobby or a leisure activity that you like, maybe to volunteer with a charity or nonprofit or church of your choice. Maybe it's just to get up and go to work every day in a job you love. And that's what I do. That's what I was able to do with my life is every day I get up and I do what I want. I'm recording this podcast in the afternoon, late in the afternoon, on Independence Day, the 4th of July. Other people are out celebrating. you know what? I'm celebrating too. I'm celebrating my liberty and my independence by working at a job that I love. Again, think about that slave. That slave can't choose where he lives, where he works, any of that. If you have wealth, if you have money, it allows you to buy freedom, and not only for yourself, but for those around you that you love. Again, for your children, for your grandchildren, for people in your community. It helps you to be able to educate yourself and educate others. It helps you to be able to express your own opinion. If you have wealth, you can express your own opinion. You don't have to kiss up and suck up to your boss. You don't have to tell somebody something you don't believe is true. If you have wealth, you can speak your mind. So that's what the First Amendment of the Constitution is all about. Freedom of speech, freedom of living your religious convictions. Well, you can't do that if you're poor. You can't do that if you're struggling to pay the bills. And that's why I say it's so important for you to understand that wealth is a whole lot more than about just money or net worth. It's about freedom. Now, people will tell you that money doesn't buy happiness, and I'll tend to agree with that. But let's step back and think about that for a minute. Money doesn't buy happiness, but as I talked about, money can buy your freedom. Your wealth can buy your freedom. So let's go back and talk about those things that we talked about. What are you going to buy with your wealth? We're going to buy a place to live. You're going to buy a car for transportation. You're going to buy food to eat. Now, those things can bring you happiness if you make the right choices, right? If you buy a home that's larger than you need just to impress the neighbors, if you buy a car that's more than you need just to keep up with the Joneses, well, then you're not going to be happy. You're going to be miserable. That's why you want to take your money and spend it on things that actually, you know what they do? They tend to bring you more money. That's the way it works. By saving and reinvesting your money, you'll become wealthier, and as you become wealthier, you'll be able to buy more freedom. Again, and it's not only for you and your partner, your spouse, it's for all those around you that you love, your children, your grandchildren, your neighbors, your community. Whenever I think about that phrase that money doesn't buy you happiness, I think of Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think he was the one that said that he agreed with that. Money didn't buy him happiness. He was no happier when he had $35 million than when he had $25 million. Now, that's a good way to look at money, and if you think about it, it's true. There's a certain level where if we have a certain income level, more money may not bring us happiness, but we need to at least maintain those necessities in our lives. A nice, safe place to live, a good place to educate and bring up our children, a secure environment where we can study and learn and practice our beliefs. Those are all things that are important to us, and you have to have a certain amount of money for that. You know, it depends on your lifestyle as to what that is. Is it $50,000? Is it $100,000? Is it $1 million income? You have to determine that, but I think if you're like Arnold Schwarzenegger, you'll agree that you probably won't be much happier with $35 million than you were with $25 million. And let's talk about that amount too, because all of you listen to this podcast, depending upon where you're at in your life, that amount's going to be different. If you're only making $50,000 a year, you're going to tell yourself, oh, if only I could make 100, or if I could make 150,000, all of my problems would go away. I'd be so happy. Likewise, if you're making 100,000, you're going to say, oh, gee, if I had 200, if I had 300,000. And that's good. That's good that because we're humans, we have expectations that expand, and they fill up the lifestyle that we create. And that's not a bad thing. We have to cap and bridle those desires for more things, not because they're bad in and of themselves, because we want that continuing, making the world a better place and continuing to reach and make things better. That's total quality management, right? You have a certain ability now. A caveman, he learns how to build a fire and he stays warm. Well, we don't all want to be living in caves with fires. We want to be living in nice houses where we have central heating. That's not a bad thing. That's progress, and that's good. But we need to be able to bridle those passions and put them to good work. So let's talk specifically, though, about money and what level you need to be at to be free. And again, it's going to depend on where you're at in your personal wealth building process. But let me tell you about a man that didn't have very much money, but he thought he was wealthy. I think he led a wealthy lifestyle, and as I look back on it, I'm convinced that he was a totally free man. And the man I'm talking about is my paternal grandfather. He was an immigrant to this country. He came over when he was 16. He made multiple trips back and forth across the ocean from Italy to America, as immigrants do even to this very day. He came here, he'd make some money, he'd send it back home, he'd save up, he'd go back home maybe to get married or to visit family, and then come back and save up more money. He did that back and forth. He only had a third grade education. He could read and write. He was born in the late 1800s, so that's a time when many people weren't even literate. But even though he only had a third grade education, he was a very smart and intelligent man. He didn't gain his financial independence or his freedom, I'd say, until he was probably 70 years old. Now, the good part about this man was he led a very healthy lifestyle, a very hard worker. He maintained his physical strength, and so he lived to be 96 years old. So he had a good 26 years of freedom, and I would say that that's more than most people get. So let's look a little bit about his life. As I said, he didn't really have a lot of money, but he had enough money that he was able to, and I would say, quote, retire. He was able to retire without having to depend on anybody else. He had a pension built up from working on the railroad. He had money in the bank saved up. He had his home paid for. He had no expenses other than just the normal things like property tax and a small amount of electricity and heating oil that he used for his home. What's more important about all these things was his lifestyle. He led a lifestyle that, number one, he enjoyed, and number two, it was productive for him. So he was a gardener. He was a master gardener. And he had about, I'd say 1 or 2 acres of property that he farmed. He farmed it without any equipment, just a shovel and a wheelbarrow and a hoe. And every day he went out in his yard and he worked, and he loved to do that. That brought him joy, and that physical work not only brought him joy, but it's what kept his body strong and healthy. And so, as a man in his mid-90s, he was stronger and had more endurance than most men that were probably 20 years old. He also, because he grew his own food, he led a healthy lifestyle. He ate good, pure, high-quality, nutritious food. He grew all of his own vegetables. He raised bees. Different times in his life, he had animals, goats or ducks or chickens. The man did every day what he enjoyed doing. He worked very hard, but he had such a desire to get up every day and go to work and work in his yard and handle this massive garden and studying what the weather patterns were like, and knowing how to plant by the stars and by the full moon, and knowing which trees to graft, how to take a pear tree and graft it into an apple tree, or how to take a wild crab apple tree and graft a domestic branch of an apple tree into it, how to manicure and grow his grapevines, and how to turn those grapes into wine. He was just an amazing, amazing man. And the point, again, is that he didn't have a lot of money. He lived in a very small, humble house, something that most of us would probably consider poverty level. But he felt that he was rich and a wealthy man. Looking back all these years, I agree with him. He was one of the most intelligent men I've ever known. He had the most wisdom, and he had the most freedom and liberty in his life of just about anybody I've ever met. So can you get that way? I think you can. Let me tell you about my own personal journey. I spent a lot of years working for the man, right, doing things that I hated to do because I had to pay the bills. Now, I was always smart enough that I was never really in debt other than the mortgage on my home, but I had a large family. I had a wife and children that depended on me to bring money and food and clothes and recreation and education, all the things they needed. I had to provide that for them. So I just couldn't one day quit my job and say, hey, I hate working for the man. I want to be free. I want to go do my own thing. I had to have the discipline and the patience and the fortitude to go make those things happen. I was so indoctrinated into our culture that I was probably about, let's say, 25, 26 years old before I really knew that I hated doing what I did. So yeah, I'd say about 26. When I was 26, I realized I couldn't stand what I was doing. It took me about another 9 or 10 years till I was about 35 till I figured out what I did want to do. But by that time, I had a large family, a lot of people that depended on me. I had a mortgage to pay for. So it was another 12 or 13 years before I could acquire enough wealth to really put myself on a journey of freedom. I still, for a few more years, kept doing what I didn't like to do because I wanted to set myself up not for a short-term gain, but for a long-term prosperity, so that I could not only live the next 5 or 6 or 7 years in happiness, but so that I could live the rest of my life in happiness. Now I'm nowhere near as strong and healthy and live as good of a lifestyle as my grandfather did, so I don't know if I'll make it to 96 or not, but I think I probably have at least a good 25 years or so. So from the time, let's say, I'm in my early 50s till I'm in my mid-70s, I'm going to get up every day doing the work that I love, the work that I enjoy doing. I'm going to live where I choose to live. I'm going to be able to express my opinions the way I want to express them. I'm going to be able to help my family and my loved ones and my children. Help them to be educated, help them to understand freedom and the lifestyle that I have. And I can only do all that because I have wealth. So how was I able to accomplish all that? Well, as you listen to these podcasts, you'll hear more and more of my story. But here's the 2 pieces of good news that I want to share with you. Number 1 is, if I did it, you can do it. I'm no one special. I'm not a rocket scientist. I don't have a PhD. I wasn't born wealthy. None of those things. Just like many of you, I started out in an average American household, in some ways maybe even less than average, and I started late in life. You heard me say I was 35 before I really figured out what I wanted to do. I did it. You can do it too. The other bit of good news is you don't have to wait 12 or 25 years. You know, when I told you it took me those 25 years to accomplish it from the time I realized I was miserable until I was able to actually do something about it, that doesn't mean that I was unhappy all those 25 years, because the point is that once you figure it out and you start on that journey to financial independence, you start walking down the road of building your wealth, you start heading towards your goals and objectives, then you're successful that first step you take. You can walk down that path to your financial independence being a wealthy man or wealthy woman. That first day you make that commitment that you're going to have a better lifestyle, that you are going to be wealthy, that you're going to take care of your own responsibility, that you're not going to be a slave, and that you're going to apply the first wealth building principle of knowing that wealth is freedom and you're ready to go out and set yourself free. Now, I thank you for listening to this first inaugural edition of the Wealthsteading Podcast. And join me on episode 2 to learn about the second principle of wealth building, and that's living debt-free. For the Wealthsteading Podcast, this is John Pugliano. You can find us at wealthsteading.com. Welcome to the Wealthsteading Podcast. I'm John Pugliano, your host. I'm the founder and money manager at investablewealth.com. And today we're carrying on our 10-part series of studying the wealth building principles. Today we're going to cover wealth building principle number 2, live debt free. Now, it may seem like common sense that to live debt free and to build your savings would be a natural step in the progress of building wealth, but you would be surprised how many people, even people that are extremely high income earners, don't understand that principle or that concept. Some of the notorious violators of this concept are doctors and also executives, corporate executives. People that like to lead flashy lives. They spend a lot more money than they bring in. And so at the end of the day, they're still living paycheck to paycheck, just like Joe Sixpack. If you don't believe it's true, definitely look at the statistics. There are a lot of people that are making $100,000 or more. The problem is they're spending 10 or 20% well beyond that. We're going to get into a little bit about how people get into that situation. But for now, let's focus on 2 aspects of savings. The things that we'll cover in this episode will be saving as a building block and as a foundation for building wealth, and then also saving as a lifestyle. And this relates back to the first principle of wealth building, which is wealth is freedom. Well, let's talk about the foundational part first. I'm going to share a secret with you that everybody knows. You've heard people say the rich get richer. Well, it's true. And do you know why? The rich get richer because they can put their money to work for them. You can go to work and you can earn $10 an hour, $1 million an hour. It depends if you're flipping hamburgers or if you're a professional athlete or professional entertainer, how much you're going to make per hour. But at the end of the day, you can still only make so much per hour. So to actually build wealth, you have to get paid beyond what you make in an hour. what you make as a wage. And the way you do that is by putting your assets to work for you, putting your money to work instead of you working. So 24 hours a day, your assets can be compounding and accumulating wealth. That may be through a small business that you own. It may be money that you have in real estate. It may be money that you have in the stock market. The point is the rich get richer because they have more money to begin with. They have more money to put to work. So the point of the matter is the wealthy, the rich people get richer because they have more money to put to work for them. Imagine each little dollar being a little working slave for them. If you have $1,000, you have 1,000 little slaves. If you have $1 million, you have 1 million little slaves. Guess which one you're going to get wealthier on? The $1 million, right? Think of it this way. People were always asking me, hey, John, I got an extra, I got $1,000 to invest. What should I do with it? Well, I'm going to tell you in later episodes what you should do with it, but suffice it to say for now, you shouldn't be investing it. And here's why. If you only have $1,000 and you study and you work real hard and you understand the investment landscape and you're able to get a 10% return on your $1,000, well, you just made $100. So if you factor in all the hours you spent trying to get that 10% return, you probably ended up making less than $10 an hour. So you could have made more money flipping hamburgers or washing cars or cutting grass or even not going out to dinner a couple nights, right? That would have saved you $100. So the point I'm trying to make here is, again, savings is the foundation to wealth because you have to have that foundation built. You have to have that accumulation of wealth to make money. Now let's look at that same scenario. Let's say that you have $1 million portfolio and that you spend some time and effort and you find out a way to get a 10% return on that. Well, now a 10% return on $1 million portfolio is going to be $100,000. You may have spent a month of studying and effort to manage that portfolio, and that may have been spread out over a year, but in terms of actual working time, maybe you only spent 30 days at it and you made $100,000. That's about twice the average take-home pay for families in America today. So you see, the effort you put into it is a lot less, even though you got a much greater reward, and that's because you had a bigger amount to work with, right? Think of it as a big shovel. The bigger the shovel you have, the bigger the ditch you can dig, or the bigger the ditch you can fill in. If you think of it in terms of weapons, if you go to a gunfight, are you going to bring a 22 or are you going to bring a 45 caliber? Yeah, both are weapons, both can do the job, but a 45 caliber as a defensive weapon is going to do a whole lot more for you, has a whole lot more stopping power than a 22 rimfire would. So think of that in terms of your savings. That's why it's important that you live debt-free so that you can accumulate this wealth, so you can put the wealth to work for you so that you can continue, again, live a free lifestyle. Now let's talk about savings. The equation to savings obviously is that your savings are your earnings minus your cost of living, the things that you spend. In this episode, we're going to focus on the cost of living. In other episodes, we'll be talking about increasing your earnings power. But for sake of the second wealth building principle of living debt-free, let's just talk about what it costs you to live. Think of all the things that you buy every day, the things that you need to support your family. It really boils down to most of your assets are spent on two things, and those tend to be durable goods, and that would be shelter and transportation. Now, you may rent, you may live in an apartment or something, but I'm going to speak in generalities, and so I'm going to talk in terms of shelter as you owning a home, because even if you're renting, you're paying $300 a month, $2,000 a month in rent, whatever it is, that equivalent amount would be spent on a mortgage. So we're not going to talk about renting. We're just going to talk about owning in this example, or at least financing a mortgage. So those durable goods that you spend your most on, we're talking about shelter and transportation. So that's your home and your car. Now, of course, we do spend a lot of money on other things: food, leisure activities, healthcare, education. But when you add all those up, they generally don't account for as much as you're spending on those first two items, which happen to be durable goods. So let's break those down and let's talk about them. Your shelter, your home. Now let's focus on your home. And let me start out by saying, when I talk about your home and when I talk about things throughout these podcast episodes, I'm not telling you how to live. It's none of my business how you live. I'm not telling you what you should spend your money on or what you shouldn't. The point that I'm trying to make is to give you some guidance as to how you can create a lifestyle, a frugal lifestyle that will help you one day be financially independent. And so when you're financially independent, you'll realize that you have a lot more freedom than you do if you're stuck and burdened with a lot of bills or consumer spending. And the information I'm going to give you are based on my own personal life experiences, how I've accumulated my own wealth, as well as the successful, what I call middle-class millionaires that I've been studying for the last several decades. Now, the statistics are out there. You can look them up for yourself. You can also read the works of Dr. Thomas Stanley, who wrote The Millionaire Next Door. I read his book when it first came out in 1996. It had a fundamental change in my way of thinking and helped me put myself on that course to becoming financially independent. So I know these principles work. Again, I'm not telling you how to live. I'm just making suggestions, and you can decide what's right and what's wrong for you. But when it comes to owning your home, if you want to do what middle-class millionaires have done, or what Dr. Thomas Stanley calls the millionaire next door, you have to cap your spending at 2.5 to 3 times your annual income on your home. So if you have an annual income of $50,000, you would want to cap your mortgage on a home that would be $150,000. So a $50,000 income, $150,000 mortgage. If you made a $100,000 income, you would want to cap your mortgage at $300,000. It's a very simple rule. It's a rule of thumb. There's means for interpretation, obviously, on that. But what I'm telling you is that's the way that simple middle-class people have been able to accumulate wealth. And what they don't do is every time they get a job promotion is they sell their house and they move up to a bigger one. That's the flaw. That's the mistake that consumers make, that high consumers make, and they never accumulate any wealth. Now, some of you may be saying, hey, I live in New York. I live in New York City, and I can't buy a house for $300,000. Well, you know what? You're right. If you're living in New York City and you're only making $100,000 and you're living in a home that has a mortgage of $400,000 or $500,000 or $600,000, that may be what's available. That may be the market price. But the chances of you accumulating enough wealth by the time you're in your late 40s or early 50s are probably slim to none. So you have the reality of, do you relocate or do you find a way to make more money? That's really what your choices are. These are hard choices, but they're reality. Now, the things you need to think about are what's really important to you. I've lived all over this country. I would take job promotions and constantly move from city to city every couple years. And I was always able to find a home that was in that 2.5 to 3 times my annual income. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes it took a lot of searching. Oftentimes it meant that I didn't live in the best neighborhood. Now, that doesn't mean I lived in the ghetto. It just doesn't mean that I lived in the top-of-the-line neighborhood. It may mean that I had to drive a little farther to work, or that the area I was in wasn't as trendy. But I looked for the things that were most important to my family. I looked to make sure that it was a good, safe environment for my wife and children to live in. I looked at it was an area that had good schools for my children to go to. I looked at the culture of the area to make sure that it was similar to my family, so that we could assimilate into that neighborhood. Were there friends for my children to play with? Was there a church for us to attend? All those kind of cultural things factored into where we lived. But I always found a way to stay within that income restriction. And since your home is likely to be your single largest purchase, that's why it's so important that you spend time to find the right house in the right price range. Now let's look at some case studies of people that lived by this rule or people that violated this rule. Let's look at engineers. Engineers tend to be disproportionately millionaires, or disproportionately financially independent when compared to other career groups. And this is especially true when you look at engineers that focus on things like mining engineering, petroleum engineering, industrial engineering. These would be men or women that not only are in the engineering field, but their jobs tend to have them live in areas that are not major metropolitan areas. So although software engineers obviously are incredibly wealthy, if you're working for Google or some high-tech company and you're forced to live in San Francisco where it's very expensive, it would be harder for you to build wealth than, say, you're a petroleum engineer that's living somewhere in a more rural area of Oklahoma, or a a mining engineer that's living somewhere in western Pennsylvania. Okay, you get the picture. These are people that are making above average incomes, but they're living in below average cost of living areas. So among these engineers is where you'll find the highest percentage of millionaires, even though they may not have the highest, although they may not have the highest income level. So these are people that obviously are living well within their means. They have high earnings, they have low cost of living. They, rather than spend all that money on their home, since they're in a more rural area, they're able to save that money, and as we talked about, they're able to put that money to work for them. That's what I'm talking about. Now, you may not be a petroleum engineer and able to live in a more rural area, so you have to adjust accordingly. You may tell me that, hey, I'm living in New York City, I'm only making $100,000, it doesn't go very far, I can't get a place to live for under $500,000. Now, that all may be true, but it's also true that your likelihood of becoming financially independent are drastically reduced. So you have to make that commitment. Do you want to try and move? Do you want to try and make more income? Those are your really only two choices. Now let's look at the other side of the equation, the people that violate this rule, and this would be the people that have above average income, but they have a disproportionate amount of millionaires or amount of people that are financially independent in this particular career segment. And this would be the corporate executive. And I'm not necessarily talking about the vice presidents of major corporations, because they're earning enough where they can compensate for the higher cost of living they may encounter. But I'm talking about the 99% that never make it that far up. So your mid-level managers and your lower C-level type executives. So let's play this out and let me explain to you how it would work. Let's, for example, say that you have this young person that comes to work for a big corporation, and they start out as a low-level salesman, and they start out in a small region of the country. Let's say they're in Des Moines, Iowa, and they're a really good salesperson, and in a couple of years they get promoted, and they move them from Des Moines to, say, Minneapolis, and they get to be a territory manager. And they travel that area, and they have salesmen working under them, and they do a really good job. And then they get moved from the Twin Cities to, say, Chicago, and they get to be, a vice president or regional manager or something. And they do another good job there, and the next time they get promoted, they go to New York City. So you can see each step along the way, they went to a more expensive city. They went from Des Moines to Minneapolis to Chicago to New York. Every time they moved, they got a promotion. But what do you think they did every time they moved? They bought a bigger house, right? When they lived in Des Moines, they had a small house. They probably had a small family. They were at a much smaller income. By the time they get to Chicago or New York City, they think they're a big executive. They're making, well into the six figures. So they buy the house on the golf course. It has to be in a more prestigious neighborhood. They've got to entertain people within their corporation, maintain a certain appearance of a standard of living. And what happens is all of those promotions, all of that increase in earnings that they received, rather than it turning into earning and wealth building power for them, it just goes to pay their bills. So sure, they're living in a nicer neighborhood, they're living in a bigger home, but at the end of the month, they're broke, and they probably have less disposable income than they did back when they were just a lowly salesman living in Des Moines, Iowa. That's the American consumer attitude, and that's why so many people find themselves in debt. Now let's look at the other big durable good that we talked about, and that's transportation. First of all, whether you own a car or whether you use public transportation or however you get around, every time you move, it costs you money. As a rule of thumb, just think about 50 cents a mile. If you have to commute every day and go 30 miles one way, well, round trip is costing you at least $30 a day to do that. So again, run the math on that. So you do some back of the envelope calculations on that and find out how much you're spending in commuting dollars, and that helps you determine how close you need to work to your home. What's that commuting distance? What's the trade-off? Are you ending up spending all the money on transportation, or should you just buy a home that's closer to work and spend the extra money on the home? You need to do that analysis to determine how you factor that in. But whatever you do, think about 50 cents a mile. So the next time you're going to run down to get a cup of Starbucks coffee or buy some bread, milk at the store, think about that 50 cents a mile. How much did you just spend? Another $3 or $4 or $10 driving to the store? Maybe you shouldn't drive as much. Maybe you shouldn't commute as much. Let's talk about the vehicle that you own. Let's talk about your car. Now, we buy cars to get around, but we also buy cars for social status. I understand that. Again, I'm not telling you how to live. I'm not telling you not to buy a Lamborghini. I'm just telling you that the more money you spend on a car, the less money you have to put to work for you, and the less likely you're going to be wealthy. So you, just like we talked about with the home, you may have a big home. It may look like you're wealthy, but if you're taking all your money to pay off your Lamborghini or your Lexus or your Tesla or whatever fancy car you drive, then at the end of the day, you're not wealthy. At the end of the month, you're broke, just like Joe's six-pack. So think about that car you drive, and again, think about the engineers that we talked about, these guys that are living in a more rural area. The mining engineer, he's probably driving a pickup truck, right? He's probably not driving a $85,000 Land Rover. He's probably driving a Ford F-150 pickup truck for, $25,000. That's why he's building wealth and you are not. So it just comes down to your lifestyle choices. Do you want to drive a big flashy car that you can't afford, or do you want to drive a car that's more affordable and have money in the bank? Let's look at my own lifestyle. First of all, I always drive cars that I keep for 10 or 15 years. If I buy a car new, I don't get rid of it for at least 10 or 15 years, and chances are at that time that I've passed it on to, to a child or a family member or something like that, because it doesn't have any resale value. But I get every dollar I put into it out of it. I don't have a rule of thumb for you on how much you should spend as a percentage of your income like we did with the home purchase. But what I do have is the principle that I've lived by, which is if you don't have cash to pay for that car, don't buy it. And you're going to tell me, well, hey, I'm making $50,000 and I don't have the $35,000 to buy the car that I want. Well, you're exactly right. You don't have the $35,000 cash to buy that, and you shouldn't buy it. You need to look at buying a used car for $10,000 or $15,000 and save your money until you can buy a better car. I know that's a hard thing to say. I know that's a hard concept to live by, and I'm not telling you how to live your life. What I am telling you, though, is that that's the way I did it in my life, and that's the way I've seen countless millionaires that I've been studying over the decades. That's what they did. The first car I ever bought new was a Volkswagen Golf. I didn't have any children at the time. It was a great little commuting car. It at that time, many years ago, cost under $10,000. I had cash for it, and I bought it. And I've lived that way my whole life. Many times in my life, I bought used cars. Again, I could have afforded the payments to buy a new car, but I thought it was much more practical to own a used car than it was to make payments on a car that ultimately I couldn't afford. Now, I promise you, if you take care of those two big durable items we talked about, your home and your car, you live within your means, you don't pay more than 3 times your annual income for the mortgage on your home, and you don't move every time you get a promotion, that extra incremental income that you keep getting over the years from promotions, you just start putting that aside in savings. On your car, you pay cash for your cars. If you have $25,000 cash, you buy a new car. If you don't, you save up $5,000 or $10,000 and you buy a used car. And then you run those cars till they fall apart. That's the path to getting to be financially independent. If you live that lifestyle, then you'll also be frugal on the other thing, on the consumer items. You'll eat out less. You'll be more frugal in the consumer products that you spend. And let's talk about some consumer products real quickly. As far as things like electronics, you never buy more than what you need. If you need a new computer or a laptop or a tablet or a smartphone, whatever it is, don't buy the one that has the most memory or the most computing power. Buy the one that you need that meets the job that you want, because you know that in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, what you just bought is going to be totally obsolete. So if you buy the top of the line, in 3 months it's not going to be the top of the line anymore. Now on more durable goods, on things like furniture or like we talked about with the car, you're going to buy things that last. Buy the best quality that you can afford with the cash that you have. You never buy anything on payments. You never put anything on a credit card that you're not going to pay off in 30 days. But you buy the best quality that you can afford, and then you keep and maintain it and preserve it and repair it, and it'll last you a lifetime. I can give you countless examples of things that I've owned for decades, multiple decades, it was just a one-time purchase, and because I didn't abuse them, because I took care of them, because I repaired them when they needed fixed, they just lasted and lasted. And that's everything from a wristwatch to furniture. I'll give you a perfect example of furniture. If you come into my home, you'll find that I live in a nice home, and it's nicely decorated, and I have nice furniture. But they're not all new pieces. Many of them are older pieces that other family members have owned that I've had refurnished. And let me give you just one example. My brother was born in 1957, and my parents went out in that year and they bought him a brand new wooden crib. Now this, of course, like I say, is in the 50s. This is when things were built in America and they were made of quality. But they bought that crib in 57. 4 years later, I was born. I was put in that crib. We didn't have any children after me. My mother wrapped that crib up and she put it in the attic. And that crib stayed in that attic for 26 years until 1987 when I had my first child. And I brought my daughter home from the hospital. I put her in that exact same crib. Now I had it cleaned up. I had it sanded down and refinished. It was all nice and safe and spanky new clean. But I put my first child in that, and I not only raised my first child in that, but all 6 of my children were raised in that crib. And now that very same crib is wrapped up and it's stored in my basement, and it's awaiting use by one of my grandchildren. You think about how many years, how many different children, how many different generations have been in just that one crib. And that's a crib that was purchased one time and only had one refinishing repair made to it. And it's lasted all these decades upon decades. We're talking nearly 60 years. That's the way quality, durable goods work. Buy the best you can afford, take care of them, repair them when they break. Don't throw them away and go out and buy new. Now, if you live your life this way, you'll develop a frugal lifestyle, particularly when you save on your home and on your car. That'll just trickle down into the rest of your spending, and you'll find that you won't waste money. You won't waste money eating out all the time in restaurants. You won't waste money eating, fast junk food. And with that comes the benefits of not only the financial part, because remember, the purpose of this podcast isn't that you get wealthy just for the sake of having money. It's that you can become wealthy so that you become free. You want to be a free man or a free woman. You don't want to be indebted to anyone. You don't want to be restrained by anyone. So the benefits of this lifestyle are not only the income part, but you also find, as in eating out in restaurants and things, rather than eating cheap fast food or just even going out and spending all your money in nice restaurants, you're going to stay home more. You're going to prepare your meals. You're going to eat healthier. You're going to be less likely to have diabetes or be obese or have heart disease or cancer, because you're going to eat healthy, nutritious food that you prepare from scratch, as opposed to getting out of a box you're getting from a fast food restaurant. These are the benefits that are derived from having a wealth-setting lifestyle. So that's going to wrap up episode 2, as we talked about the second principle of wealth building, which was living a debt-free life. I encourage you to evaluate where you're at now and look at ways that you can take costs out of your life so that if you're not living debt-free now, you can put yourself on a path where you can be and where you're saving money as opposed to wasting money. Now I invite you to join us on our next episode, which we will discuss the third wealth building principle, which is production is the source of wealth. If you have any questions that you'd like to submit to the podcast or give us comments, you can do so on our website. That's wealthsteading.com. Thank you for listening. This is John Pugliano. Hello, this is John Pugliano with another installment of the Wealthsteading Podcast. Today we're continuing our discussion on the 10 principles of wealth building. And during this episode, we're going to be talking about the third principle, and that is production is the source of wealth. Let's jump right into today's discussion on wealth building. What we're going to talk about is also described on my website at www.investablewealth.com under the tab of Building Wealth. So if you look at that Building Wealth section, you'll be able to see some written commentary that'll follow along with what we're talking about today on the Wealthsteading Podcast. Now, on the last episode, we talked about saving being a result of your earnings minus your cost of living. And on that principle of living debt-free, that was the second principle of wealth building. In that episode, we focused on the reduction of your cost of living. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about the earnings side, the production part. And again, this sounds like a simple principle, but you'd be surprised how many people don't understand it. And even if you think in your own life, if you really ask yourself, have you really thought of wealth in this manner? That wealth is production. wealth isn't derived from winning the lottery or an inheritance or something like that. 80% of millionaires in the U.S. today are middle-class millionaires. They're people that have developed some type of a business where they sell a product or a service in their community. This is something that's wanted and needed, and that's how they've built their wealth. And so that's what we're going to discuss, and it really comes in 3 phases. Now, these 3 phases of production can take as much as 21 years. I basically like to look at it as each phase would take approximately 7 years. So the bad news is if you're starting from scratch, it could take you 21 years. Now, if you're only 18, that's not a problem. If you're 55, that might be a little bit of an issue. But that's only if you're starting from scratch. Now, I would assume if you're an older adult, you're not going to have to start from scratch, that you already have some level of training, and you could pick up from there. I sincerely believe that in America, even today, with all the problems, the perceived problems that we may have, that any family or any individual that really wants to work at it can become financially independent in as little as 21 years. And if you don't believe me, go back and look at any immigrant community from the time this country started, whether it was the British or the Dutch coming over in the colonial periods, the Germans, or whether it's the Hispanics or Chinese or other migrant groups today. Hard-working immigrants can come to this country. They don't speak the language. They may not even have an education. And in as little as 1 generation, their family can become financially independent. Well, I believe that native-born Americans can do the same thing. We don't because we're spoiled. We don't because we don't see the opportunity. We don't, quite frankly, because we're lazy. So let's get over that and let's look at these 3 wealth-building phases, these processes that we can accomplish in, say, as much as 21 years or maybe as little as less than 7, depending upon where you're starting at. Now, these 3 phases are the apprenticeship phase, the business model phase, and the investment income phase. Okay, so the apprenticeship phase, well, that's exactly what you think it is. It's all about getting an education, receiving training. The apprenticeship period can be as much as 7 years or less than that. It depends on where you're at in your educational process. Do you currently possess marketable skills and abilities? Can you do basic math and working with numbers? Can you communicate well in the English language? Do you have some marketing skills? These are all things that if you don't have, you may have to learn. Now, I can't tell you what's specifically right for you. You have to figure that on your own. If you look at 1,000 middle-class millionaires, they all pursued 1,000 different paths to get to where they're at, and that's the beauty of our country. The opportunity is unlimited. So in your apprenticeship phase, what you want to do is you want to study and learn how to make a product or provide a service that's needed and wanted in your community. Again, I can't tell you what that is. You need to go out and find that on your own. But once you determine what that is, you need to find out how you can produce that at a reasonable cost. Learn how to make it, again, a product or a service. Maybe it's a food product, so you would be a chef or some type of culinary artist. Maybe it's a service like pesticide or lawn care service or accounting. Again, I don't know what's needed and wanted in your community. I don't know what your skills and abilities are. Obviously, if you're lousy with math and figures, you probably wouldn't want to be providing accountant services. On the flip side of that, if you're physically weak, if you have a herniated disc or something, you probably aren't going to be providing lawn care services. So you need to find out what the niche is that you can provide. But once you do that, all you have to do is be great at it. And I say that in a joking way, but it's true. You've probably heard people talking about to become an expert, you have to put in your 10,000 hours. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. It may take you up to 7 years to get trained and educated and to fulfill this apprenticeship process. And although I call it an apprenticeship process, it doesn't necessarily have to be maybe the blue-collar connotation that I'm speaking of it on. Being an apprentice is what a doctor goes through, right? It's called being in residency. Being an apprentice may mean you go to school and you get your electrical engineering degree at a university. Again, I can't tell you exactly what that is, but you figure out what product and service you want to provide, and then you spend the next 7 years becoming a master of it. That may mean you have to pay someone to learn, like a university or a trade school. That may mean that you get brought in to a company and you work your way up. They start training you on as you accomplish small tasks. They give you larger and larger ones, and you grow from there. It may just be something you start on your own. You may go to the library and Google and YouTube and learn how to do something on your own. I promise you this 7-year training period is critical. And like I say, it doesn't matter what area you're in. I've met physicians that had to go through an apprenticeship. I've met people that paint cars and do auto body work that go through an apprenticeship. It may be called different things, but it's an education and a training process. And the key is that you can learn to be great at it, and that it's a product and services. It's a product and service that's needed and wanted, and people in your community pay good money for it. The good news on that is it may not take you 7 years to become an apprentice, to go through the apprentice process. It may not take you 7 years to go through each of these 3 phases that I'm talking about. It depends where you're at in your life. If you're a 12-year-old or a 14 or a 16-year-old, you're probably going to be starting from scratch. Chances are if you're 30 years old, you already have some type of skills and abilities, and you don't have to start from the beginning. So let's look at the second phase of production, and that's the business model. Now, you spent the last 7 years or 10,000 hours or whatever it took you to learn this trade or this skill that you are now excellent at. And it's a product or service that I keep repeating is wanted and needed in your community. That's a key. You know how to do it. Whether again you were a doctor going through a residency or whether you were an auto mechanic applying your trade, you've learned this skill. Now, the other thing to consider about this apprenticeship phase is that you may be getting paid for it. You may spend all 7 years on the job training. That's not important. It's not important how you get the education. In fact, it's better, obviously, if you can be getting paid or reimbursed for it. The problem with opportunity in America is that most people are never entrepreneurial enough to get out of this apprenticeship phase. And you're going to say, oh, John, are you kidding me? People learn and get trained and move up to different levels all the time. Well, they do. They may go into management, mid-level management or something, or they may get to be a crew leader. But they don't get to that next phase. And the second phase that I'm talking about is the business model phase. The business model phase is where you're called the entrepreneur, right? You're the boss. Most people go to school or wherever, they get their education, they get a job, and even if they rise up in the organization, they still pretty much stay at that level where they're an employee. An apprentice is an employee. Yeah, no, they may not be getting trained anymore, but they've only risen to a certain level of competency. They're not responsible for profit and loss. They're not going out on their own. They're not making key decisions. So they never really leave that apprenticeship phase. And this even applies, as I say, to people that are in corporate America and have been there for 25 years, even if they're a mid-level manager. If they're not constantly submitting themselves to the risks and the rewards of being an entrepreneur, then they really are just in an extended phase of the apprenticeship process. And that's why they don't build wealth. So to get to that next phase, we have to enter the business model. The business model is where you're the entrepreneur. You're the boss. And if you're not physically the boss, say you are still working for a corporation or you're employed by somebody else, even if you're not the boss, you're at least thinking like the boss. You're thinking profit and loss. You're thinking risk and reward. You're thinking beyond the job that you have, and you're looking up and down the supply chain. You're looking up the supply chain and you're seeing, who are my vendors? Who are my suppliers? What are the inputs into my industry? And then you're looking at that source of production. Okay, I can do my job, but how do other people in this organization fit together? How do all the nuts and bolts come together to create the final product or service that the customer ultimately wants to buy? And then you're also looking at your distribution channels. Even if you're not in sales, even if you're not in marketing, maybe you're an engineer, you still, at this level, to be in the business model level, you're thinking like the boss of the organization. And the boss of the entrepreneur has the big picture. He sees it from the beginning to the end, and he's always looking at ways to optimize it so that he can make a better profit. Employees don't think that way because employees never really get to share in the profit. Oh, they may get a bonus or some type of an incentive, but it's really the boss, it's the entrepreneur that gets the big payday. So in this phase, you're thinking like the boss, and it's best if you can be the boss. Maybe you started out as an apprentice, you learned your trade, you went to work for another company or corporation, you did that for 7 years or so, then you quit and you go out on your own and you start a small business, or you start supplying to the company that you used to work for, or you work for them as a contract employee, something. It's something where you are the boss, where you're the key decision maker, you're responsible for all the risk, but you also enjoy all the reward. And you see, that's the key, and that's why I say that the third wealth building principle is that production is the source of wealth. The source of wealth doesn't come from our paycheck. The source of wealth doesn't come from compensation we receive from the government. The source of wealth doesn't come from an inheritance or winning the lottery. The source of wealth has to come from production. And you have to go from being just an apprentice or just a trainee or just an employee to actually being the boss, to being the entrepreneur. And when you figure out how to provide the product and service better than other people in your area, when you're better than the competition, the customers will flock to you because you found a better way to do it, because you've found efficiencies in your system, because you're unique and you're using your unique traits and abilities and skills to provide this product or service. You are going to be better than the competition. And as a result of that, you're not going to get a small incremental profit. You're going to get a windfall. The amount that you receive will be larger in reward than the effort you put into it. It has to work that way. Remember, in previous episodes we talked about you can't just get paid like an hourly wage or paid only for your efforts. You have to put your assets to work for you. You have to be compensated over and above what you do. Well, that's what the entrepreneur, that's how he's paid. That's how the boss is paid. You're not being paid because you personally worked, or even the 3 or 4 or the 100 people that work for you put in so many hours to do it. It's that your idea is better. It's that your system is better. It's that the brand that you created receives a premium in the marketplace. And that's how you get wealthy, because you're being paid on a grander scale than on the effort you're putting into it. Now again, this business model phase, it may take you 7 years. It could only take you 3. It depends on how good you are. It depends on where you're starting from. Now the final phase that I want to talk to you about of the production cycle is investment income. Now you went through these 3 phases. You spent 7 years or so as an apprentice. You spent 7 years or so building the business model, learning how to be the boss, actually taking over and being the entrepreneur. Now this last phase, now this is the exciting part, this investment income phase of the process. Because once you've built this business model and it's throwing off these profits to you, you're able to take those profits, and whether you reinvest them back into your company, whether you put them into real estate, whether you put them into the stock market, again, you ask 1,000 different millionaires how they got where they are, and you'll get 1,000 different answers. I can't tell you at this point what you're going to do. You'll find a way to reinvest this income, and it'll provide you an even larger return than what you're getting on your current business. And this is the business that you still have to go to, right? You're still working 40 or 50 or 80 hours a week with your business because you're the boss, you're the entrepreneur. If you're not there, your employers are going to slack off. You know, if Steve Jobs didn't go to the office every day when he was at Apple, the creativity would have suffered, right? He was the emphasis at Apple at the time that he was running it. So he still had to be there. You're going to have to be at the business model phase of this process. But when you get into the investment income, this is where you don't have to be there. This is where you're sleeping at night and your assets are still making you money. Again, I can't explain to you exactly at this point what it is that you're going to invest in. But because you've developed these abilities to be able to see value and understand profit and loss, you're going to know how to invest your money. And you're going to have assets in the neighborhood of $250,000, $300,000, maybe $750,000, because that's going to be profit that's being spun off from your business model. And if you remember in our earlier lesson, we talked about living debt-free, so you learned how to save, and you're not wasting that money. You've been constantly saving it. And since you've saved it, you now have this war chest. This war chest is going to hold several $100,000 at least. You're going to be able to put that money to work outside of what you do every day. And again, I don't know if it's going to be in rental property, in real estate, or in the stock market, or where you're going to put that, but you're going to find a way to generate investment income off of this. Now, just like the previous 2 phases, this investment income phase is going to take maybe up to 7 years. Again, it depends on how much capital you're going into it with, how experienced you are, what kind of market conditions you're in, but it could take up to 7 years. Remember, your business model is constantly throwing off profits. You're reinvesting those profits during this investment income phase, and you're compounding it and making even more money that you're rolling back into. So after about a 7-year period, you now are at the point where you're financially independent. If you chose, at that point, you could just stop working, you could sell your business, you could Stop reinvesting if you wanted to. Now, when I mean that you're financially independent, generally what I'm saying is that you would have enough to live at your current level of lifestyle for the next 20 years. So just to make the numbers easy, let's say that you're living off of $100,000. Your lifestyle requires $100,000. 20 years would be $2 million. So for you to be financially independent, you'd have to have $2 million. Obviously, if you're living off of $50,000, you can do it with half that money. But the point is that you don't have to get up and go to work for the next 10, 15, 20 years if you don't want to. Now, but because you've developed this productive lifestyle, though, because you're an excellent saver, because you're well trained in identifying markets and producing products and services that people want, because you are adept at putting together business models, because you've been the boss and been the entrepreneur, and because you've generated all this wealth through your ability to have an investment income stream, you're probably not going to quit everything tomorrow. But that's not the point. The point is that you could if you chose to. And that's the whole point of wealth being freedom. That's the whole point that you want to get to in your life, where if you chose not to go to work tomorrow, if you chose not to do anything tomorrow, you would still have an income that you could live off of. So that's the whole point of the exercise. Now, again, I know you may be saying, hey, this is impossible, this can't be done, or it used to be able to do that, but you can't do it anymore. It's not true. Look around you. You will see people from immigrants that migrated here 20 years ago to just people that were born here, men or women that are in their late 40s or early 50s, that they have their own small business. They did exactly what I just told you about, and they are in that position. I know it's true. I've seen it with my own life experiences. And the good news is, as I've said, you don't have to spend 7 years in each one of these phases. So as I've mentioned in previous podcasts, I call myself a late blooming entrepreneur because I was 35 years old before I really figured out what I wanted to do in life, and then it took me another 10 or 15 years from there to be able to put it together to where I was totally the entrepreneur, where I was totally the boss. So I know it can be done. As I keep mentioning, I can't tell you specifically what you can do because I don't know what's needed in your market. I don't know what's needed in your community. But I know if you're smart enough to be listening to this podcast, then you're smart enough to go out and follow these 3 steps that I've laid out: the apprenticeship phase, the business model phase, and the investment income phase. You can put that together. I did it. I'm not a genius. I'm not a rocket scientist. The path is there. You just need to spend some time understanding what it is that you can do. And we'll discuss those things in upcoming podcasts. For now, though, I'm going to close out this episode and we'll end the 3rd wealth building principle. We've been discussing production as the source of wealth. I do ask you to join me on the next episode where we'll talk about the 4th wealth building principle, which is identifying value. Now, if you have any questions or comments about this podcast, you can get in touch with me through the website. That's wealthsteading.com. As always, I enjoy being your host. This is John Pugliano. I'll see you on the next episode. Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Wealthsteading Podcast. I'm John Pugliano. I'm the money manager and founder of investablewealth.com. Today we're continuing our 10-part series discussing the wealth building principles. And in this podcast, we're going to be talking about wealth building principle number 4, which is identify value. Now, when it comes to building wealth, it's critical to be able to identify value. Now, being able to identify value is a sign of maturity. Think of a child. They don't have a concept of value. If they want a candy bar or a toy, they don't realize whether it's worth $1 or $100, right? The concept of $1,000 or $1 million, it has no bearing or understanding to a child. So when we talk about value, like many things, when we talk about building wealth, it really comes down to maturity. I think it's pretty safe to say that generally people that are financially independent are people that are very mature, people that have a great deal of wisdom. And that's the skill you're trying to develop as you work through these wealth building principles. So when you think about value, what comes to mind? Well, it's something of worth, right? It's something that has utility or a usefulness. Now, since this podcast is about building wealth and about money, you would naturally probably jump to the conclusion that when we talk about value, we're going to be talking about how to value a stock. And that's definitely something we'll talk about in this episode and will be a key part of ongoing episodes as we look at specific stocks and companies that are in the news and what their valuation is and whether it's a good price or not. But actually, in this episode, I'm going to talk about valuing stocks last. I'm going to talk about a couple other areas of identifying value that I think are more important and more critical to your ability to build wealth. Now, the first of those areas that I want you to think about when it comes to being able to value wealth and improve your ability to do that is with people. Now, when I talk about valuing individuals and people, I don't mean valuing them to look at someone and say, hey, what worth are they to me? What can I get out of them? That's very opportunistic, and that's not what I'm talking about at all. What I'm talking about is being able to see someone's character. And I say to be able to see someone's character because for the most part, someone with a bad character isn't going to reveal it to you. First of all, someone with a bad character may not even know that they don't have a good character. They either may be deluding themselves or they're so ignorant of social skills that they don't even know that they're lacking in character. Now let's just assume you meet a criminal. This is someone that intends to rob you or defraud you, somehow steal from you. They're not going to come out and tell you that's what they're going to do, right? So you're going to have to be able to judge their character, to find out if they're lying, to find out if they're stealing. So when you meet a new person, regardless of whether they're trying to hide their character or whether they just don't know what their character is, you need to be able to make that value judgment, right? And that's why we call it a value judgment. You need to be able to determine, is this person trustworthy? Is this person someone that I want to establish a relationship with? Have you ever thought about it in this way? You come in contact with people all the time. You're surrounded by your friends and family. But something you might not have thought about is the only people that you don't get to choose are your parents and your children, right? You were born to your parents. You didn't ask for them. You just arrived. And when you have children, you might have asked for children, but you don't get to pick which kind you want. So you're kind of stuck with your parents and you're stuck with your children. And particularly with your children, you need to take responsibility for them. But everybody else in this world is a choice for you. You get to choose what type of relationship you want to have with them, right? Your parents, you have to love and honor them. Your children, you have to love and take responsibility for. But you're not necessarily stuck with anybody else like you are with those direct relatives, right? Even your spouse. Now, you chose your spouse. And you know when choosing a spouse, being able to determine character is a key and critical factor. The same thing with your friends. When you're choosing your friends, you're really revealing your own character, right? You're choosing to associate with people that are ultimately like you or people that you want to be like. It's been said if you want to see what your future looks like, look at your friends. And again, that's because it comes back to character. So the reason it's so crucial to be able to identify value in people or to judge their character is because of the relationships you're going to have with them, whether they're going to be positive or negative, whether they're going to be loving and fulfilling, or whether they're going to be draining and codependent. Now, some people may say, hey, talking about choosing a spouse or choosing your friends, that's not really related to wealth or business. I would totally disagree. One of the singular, most important key decisions you're going to make in this life is who is your spouse, and then the second decision is who are your friends. And they have an incredible impact, not only on your wealth and your net worth, but on your happiness and your future. Now I'll let you think about that and draw your own conclusions. It's not only important to consider the value and the character of those immediately around you, your spouse and your friends, but also the people you're going to be working with, right? Whether it's a future business partner that you're going to have, or maybe you're going to be hiring employees, or even if you don't ever intend to become an entrepreneur, it's important that you know how to choose the right employer and that you go to work at a company that has the kind of coworkers that you want to be associated with. Now, a key mistake that people make when they're looking for a new job, they're always focused on what they can do to impress the prospective employer. They're always thinking about how do they make their resume look, or how do they dress for the interview, or how should they answer questions. And that's obviously important, but it's also extremely important that you're evaluating your future employer, that you're evaluating the company that you want to work for. Is it going to provide you with growth opportunities? Is it going to provide you with adequate compensation? Is it going to put you in touch with people that you can help build your network? Is it a healthy work environment? Is this a place where you can grow and be nurtured and meet other similar people like yourself? Again, this is why it's so critical for you to be able to understand and judge people's character. The worst thing you can do is enter into a business relationship with a business partner that has fraudulent intentions, or to work for an employer or employees that either skirt the law or just have bad ethics. You don't want to be associated with those people. Now let's go on to the next topic that we want to be able to identify value in, and that's opportunity. We've talked about being able to see people as they really are. You need to be able to assess opportunities and determine whether they're good or whether they're bad. Now when we first come upon an opportunity, just like when we first come upon a person, we bring biases, we bring prejudices. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Our biases and our prejudices are really just accumulation of the knowledge and the wisdom that we've built up through life. When you see a hot stove, you have a bias because of past experiences in your life that the metal on that stove will probably be hot, and if you touch it, you'll get burned. So we don't want to rule out our prejudices and our biases unless they're based on improper information or unless the situation has changed and our past experiences can no longer be applied to these new future situations. Now again, when you come upon a new opportunity, it's like coming upon a new person, and if you don't separate your emotions from your logical biases and prejudices, you can start drawing improper conclusions. You may come upon a new opportunity and it's exciting, and you think it's an opportunity to make a lot of money, and you have blinders on and you're not seeing the warning signs. You're not seeing the red flags. You're not realizing that the person that's pitching it to you is a bad character. You're not realizing that the land that you think is a great opportunity is actually swampland in Florida. Because you want to be successful, because you want to prosper, you're willing to overlook these warning signs that should be apparent to you, and that's because your emotions are getting in the way. As much as we can, we want to strip away the emotion and we want to just deal with the logic and the reasoning. Now again, this may be with a specific business deal. This may be like you're looking or assessing to buy a new company, that you're looking to get into business with a new partner, that you're looking to buy a piece of real estate. But it could also apply to you as an employee. Again, when you're looking at taking that new job somewhere, you've already assessed the people, but now look at the actual employment opportunities. Is it geographically in the right location? Is it a reasonable commute from where you live? Is it a safe work environment? Is the compensation that they're telling you you're going to receive, is that really realistic? Are you really going to get that bonus? Is the company financially sound, and are they going to be able to weather the next downturn in the economy? Or are you going to be the first one they lay off? You have to be able to, again, strip away those emotional responses and focus on the black and white facts. Apply logic and reasoning and look at that opportunity. List the pros and list the cons. Weigh each one out. Determine what's important to you. Again, what has value. Determine which of those pros and cons are just noise. They're irrelevant. And then come to the final conclusion of, is this really a good opportunity or not? You'd use the same process whenever I talk of opportunities. I'm just not talking about business deals or employment situations. I'm also talking about things like education. And when it comes to education, it may not just be your own particular education, but helping your child or your grandchild or someone you know, someone that you're mentoring, helping them decide on what type of education they should be receiving. Is the brand name of that university really worth the money they're charging for it? Are the 4 years of opportunity cost or 5 or 6 years of opportunity cost that you're going to be sitting in that classroom, is that really worth it? What's the real opportunity? Are you better off going to a local community college for 2 years to knock out your basic educational requirements and then transferring on to a better brand named university? Again, this is all part of learning how to value an opportunity. And this can also and should also be done in your individual personal life. For a vacation, for example. Before you go on a vacation, assess the opportunity of it. Is this really the place I want to go to? Is this really going to make me feel refreshed and renewed? Is this vacation really worth the money I'm spending on it? What do you want that vacation to provide for you? Do you just want a distraction? Do you want to go someplace where you can relax and rest? Do you want to go someplace where you can meet new people? Do you prefer to go someplace where you can spend time with old friends or with relatives? Determine what you really want out of that vacation, and then again, take the emotion out of it, go back to the black and white facts and say, am I going to get what I really want out of this vacation? Now, the next likely place that would want to be able to improve our ability to judge the value of is on property. And naturally, we're going to think of property in terms of real estate, like our home or an investment property. Now, in particular, when you're dealing with your home or your own residence, there's going to be a great deal of emotion in there. And just like we talked about with the opportunity or when assessing people, you have to remove the emotion. Take the emotion out of it. When you're looking at buying a new house, you drive up, the place has great curb appeal, you fall in love with it. You love the open family room, or you love the big kitchen, or you love the fantastic workshop in the garage. That's keying in on a particular emotion, something you like, maybe a hobby or something that gets you very excited. But step back and really think about it. Is this really the house you want? Is this really the particular property you want? How is this property going to change over time? Is the area going to become congested with traffic? Are there changing demographics of the neighborhood? Are the local politics or the school board or the school boundaries changing? All that can have a drastic effect on not only your quality of life, but the value of your property. So once again, you have to look at the pros and cons of this property, determine if it has what you want, and if it doesn't, are these things easily changed, right? Is this just noise? Is it just static? Or is this a major problem or a major setback that can't be corrected? If there's not enough open space in the home, maybe you can knock out a wall, right? As long as it's not a load-bearing wall, that's easy to do, doesn't cost a lot of money. If the kitchen or the bathrooms are a little old or dated, hey, not a problem. They can be upgraded, right? It's going to cost money, but it can be upgraded. It can be solved. You can put in new countertops. You can put in a new sink. But if you're buying a piece of property and you really want, say, a treed lot, and there's no trees on your lot, well, obviously it's going to take 10 or 20 or maybe 15 years to grow some trees on your property. So if shade trees or fruit trees are really important to you and your lot doesn't have any, that can be a problem, right? You can change the grass. You can easily put in sod, small little annuals or perennials. Once again, it's just a matter of hiring a landscape company or putting it in yourself. It's just a matter of money. That can be taken care of. But a 30-year-old oak tree or a 15-year-old producing apple tree, that isn't easily solved. So again, take the emotion out of it. Look at the property for what it is. Is it fairly assessed? And then ask yourself, what's the future value going to be? How is things going to change over time? Is the property on the beach and it's eroding, and in 15 years my backyard's going to wash away? Is it a lakefront property where you're sitting on a reservoir that's being overutilized by the community, and every year the water level of the lake drops, and so in 15 years you're going to be 25 feet from the beach instead of sitting right on it? Is your boat dock going to be just in dry land? These are realistic things. Look at people that have problems with their real estate, and they say, well, I would have never thought this would have happened. Well, logically, maybe 10 or 15 years before, if you had thought about it, you would have seen that nice little street that you're on changes drastically because property on the other side of the street was commercial and a Walmart came in and bought it out. Like all things, it's not so much the present value that's hard to determine, it's the future value. That's very critical with property and real estate. Now let's finish up with where most of you probably thought we were going to start with, and that's the valuation of stocks. If you're going to be investing in the stock market, the key thing to your success will be your ability to be able to put an accurate valuation on a stock. And why is that so difficult? Well, valuing a stock is just like judging a person's character, valuing the opportunity, or placing a value on the opportunity of a business deal, or placing the value on a property. And the reason is because a bad stock doesn't jump out and tell you, I'm a bad stock, don't buy me. The management and the executives of an unreputable company will do everything in their power to obscure the truth. They'll use every legal method they can to engineer their balance sheet so that their earnings look better than they are, so that their cash flow looks higher than it is, so that their liquidity looks better than it is, so that their debt looks smaller than it actually is. And when I say they'll use all legal methods, of course we also know many of these people will stoop to fraudulent practices, and they won't even care about legal considerations. They will use fraud and out lies. And you can forget about the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Better Business Bureau or anybody else. No one's going to protect you. If you buy a bad stock, you will suffer the consequences. So one of the fundamental analysis for valuing a stock is what we'd call a PE ratio, a price to earnings ratio. That's where we take the current selling price of the stock, we divide it by the earnings, and then that ratio gives us some idea of its present value. If the stock is currently making $1 a share, it's trading for $20 a share, you know that stock has a price per earnings ratio of 20 times. You can then go to other stocks that are in that same industry, and you can determine whether or not a 20 times PE is a good deal or a bad deal. Just like you would do with a house. When you go buy a piece of real estate, you walk up to a property and they're asking $300,000 for it. You would do comps on neighboring houses around that area to determine whether $300,000 is a good market price. That's the same thing you're going to do with a stock. A high growth stock is going to have a larger PE than a mature company. A stable company in a stable industry is going to have a higher PE than a smaller company in an uncertain industry. And that's because of the premium you're putting on it. The PE is really talking about the premium. How much more are you willing to pay for the quality of it? Again, think of it as a brand. If you walk into a store and you're going to buy some type of a beverage, a soft drink, you look up on the shelf and you see Coca-Cola, you see Pepsi, you see 7-Up, and then you see a brand that you've never heard of, or it's the local store brand. Well, generally, those brands that you've heard of are going to cost more than the store brand because you're paying a premium. You're paying a premium for the supposed perceived quality of that brand. Coca-Cola is going to sell for more than Fred's discount soda. Stocks would be evaluated in a similar way. Now, where it gets tricky is, like I mentioned before, unscrupulous people will do everything they can to obscure reality. And I guess you can say that's true of all human nature, not just unscrupulous people. And so when you look at that price per earnings ratio, the price is always easy to determine because you know what the price of the stock is. What's harder to determine is that earnings, the denominator side of that ratio. What are really the true earnings? Is this reported earnings? Is this operated earnings? Is this earnings that exclude a one-time charge? Is this supposedly one-time charge that's being excluded not really a one-time charge? It's a reoccurring problem that management's trying to hide. Have they shifted sales into this quarter to make it look good, but next quarter is going to suffer? Or likewise, have they postponed expenses in the next quarter that should really be reported this quarter? There are all types of schemes and gimmicks and balance sheet engineering. When I was a little kid, I used to laugh at the older people that used the word shenanigan. But now I guess that I've gotten older, maybe that I've gotten a little bit wiser, I like the word shenanigan. A shenanigan is a mischievous trick, and I think that's about the best way to describe these things that we see on Wall Street. They're balance sheet shenanigans. They're mischievous little things that are designed to trip you up to take your money from you. Now, they're not necessarily illegal, but in many cases they are unethical. Either way, if it's distorting your perception of the value and is causing you to pay more for the stock than it's worth, it doesn't matter if it's illegal or unethical. What matters is that it's taking money out of your pocket. And so you want to do everything you can to identify that up front so you don't lose money on a deal. One popular method that's been used throughout the recovery since the Great Recession of 2008-2009 is stock buyback programs. Now, buybacks have always been around and in the past they've actually in many ways helped shareholders' equity. Today, I would argue that's not necessarily the case, and this is more of a balance sheet shenanigan. And this is rampant throughout the industry. They're a good example of a company that has had flat or reduced top-line revenue, that's sales. Their sales have been going down or been staying flat for years, decades. But the management of the company wants to make it look like they're growing their earnings. So they go in and they buy back their stock. They take shares off the market. And remember, these earnings are evaluated on a price per earnings on a share basis. So if your earnings are flat or declining, but you reduce the number of shares that are publicly traded, it can make it look like your earnings are either stable or growing when they're not. These shenanigans are important for you to be able to identify and to see through. And again, they get back to the reason we're talking about the fourth wealth building principle of being able to identify value. You have to not only see present value, but particularly with stocks, you need to be able to understand what's the future value. Because the price of that stock is based more on the future value than it's based on the current value. Now, the problem with that, again, is none of us are fortune tellers, so how do we determine what the future value is going to be? It's a whole lot easier to look at that house in that neighborhood and determine what the trees are going to look like or what the traffic patterns are going to be in 20 years than it is to look at a stock and understand where that stock's going to be in 20 years. Is technology going to change its product offering? Are the people that fill the management position still going to be there in 20 years? Are new competitors going to enter the market and take away their market share? Are consumers going to be fickle and they're not going to be interested in the products that this company offers in 20 years? These are all things that are extremely hard to determine, but that's exactly what the current price is based on. It's based on the perception of future earnings. So let's look at a couple ways that we can try and help ourselves determine if the stock is fairly priced and if those future earnings that are being projected are realistic. The first thing we want to do is start, again, like we did with everything, the black and white reality. What are the facts? Take the emotion out of it and let's just look at the logic. What are the real earnings today? What has the company earned in the last 12 months? This is particularly important when you're looking at something like a penny stock. Now, penny stock doesn't necessarily mean it trades for just a penny, but it generally means that it trades for probably under $10. The most important thing that identifies a penny stock, though, is that generally they have no earnings. You'll see a lot of biotech companies that fall in this category and some other high-tech companies. You can remember the dot-com bubble of the late 1990s and 2000 of all those technology companies. They all had a story, but they had no earnings. And so when we look at a stock, we want to make sure it's not a penny stock. We want to make sure that it has some type of earnings history. What's it been making over the last 12 months? What's it been making over the last 3 years? What has it made over the last decade? Now, obviously, past earnings are not going to guarantee future returns, but at least you're going to be able to see if the management that's in place has been able to adequately utilize the resources that they have, if they're getting a good return on investment. if consumers like this product and they're actually buying it and they like it enough that the company's able to make a profit. That's what the past earnings are going to tell you. Stay away from penny stocks that have a big story and no earnings. Because again, we're taking the emotion out of it. We don't care about the story. We don't care about how supposedly great this opportunity is. We want to make sure that in 12 months it's going to be making money, because that's what today's price is based on. So what I like to look at when I evaluate a stock is, once I've looked at the past earnings, again, like the past 12 months, the past 3 or 5 years, I want to look for consistency there, and then I want to look at what the future earnings are. What are the future earnings forecasted? Now, the future earnings forecast is going to tell you a lot about the stock, is going to tell you a lot about the price of that stock. Because if the future earnings forecasted are not growing, if they're not showing any growth, then you can be sure that the price of that stock is going to decline. Investors are not going to put a high premium on a stock today knowing that their earnings are going to go down in the future, right? You wouldn't do that. You wouldn't buy a home today for $300,000 if you thought that in 5 years it was only going to be worth $150,000. Well, that's the same way with the stock. Not only do you want it to preserve its earnings for today, but you want it to be growing at 5, 6, 7%, maybe double digits. It all depends on what the actual inflation rate and what the growth of the overall economy is. So we can't nail down a specific number in this podcast. But you want to see the future earnings of that stock projected and forecasted to be growing at or above the current market conditions. Now, this comes all the way back to what we started about talking about people with their character and their integrity, because you're basing those future earnings and those forecasts on the integrity of the rating agency or the analyst or the executives and management of that company to be providing you with information that's accurate. And that's why you have to be a good judge of character. That's why you have to do your homework. That's why you have to be a skeptical person, because believe me, there are people that are out there that are doing everything they can to defraud you, to obscure the truth, and to make companies look like they have value when they don't. Every speculative bubble that has ever occurred has always occurred because people believed in unrealistic growth expectations. Eventually the truth always comes out, the bubble bursts, and if you invested in that, you're stuck with an asset that's declined at least 80% in value if it's worth anything at all. Now, from a wealth building standpoint, I think what you want to key in on when you're determining the valuation of a stock, what are those future earnings? What are they projected at? Are they growing at or above current market conditions? Can you rely on the accuracy of those forecasts? And then finally, and this is the key point, this is where big money is always made, where the windfall profits come in. You're looking for stocks that are going to be undergoing some type of a change, some type of an unexpected increase in earnings. We'll talk in later podcasts about looking for trends. But that's really what stock picking is all about. Those unexpected increases in earnings are so critical, because a stock today, remember, it's going to be priced on what people think it's going to be earning in the future. And if they think it's going to be earning $1, but you have reason to believe because of your research that that stock is undergoing some type of a positive trend, and the earnings are not going to be $1 in the future, they're going to be $1.50. Or $1.75 or $2. Well, that type of earning surprise will cause the stock price to jump exponentially. And again, that's where the big money is made. So those are the things that you want to look for. In future podcasts, we'll focus more in on looking for those type of opportunities, being able to identify trends, and then each week we'll be looking at stocks that are talked about in the media and trying to determine whether or not they're going into a positive or a negative trend, which may affect that price, again, either going up or down. These are all important things that we want to consider. Well, that wraps up our subject for today. In summary, to help you build your wealth, you want to be able to identify value. That's value in people, that's value in opportunities, that's value in property, and very importantly, that's the valuation of a stock. Take the emotion out of things. Just look at the facts, look at the current value of something, and do your best to come up with some type of a forecast as to what the future value will be. Because any premium you pay today is going to be based on that future value. And that's why it's so important to be able to identify value. Well, I thank you for joining me today on this podcast, and I invite you to come back to the next episode where we'll discuss the fifth wealth building principle, which is embracing innovation and technology. As always, if you have any comments about the podcast or any questions that you'd like to hear answered on future podcasts, please visit us at wealthsteading.com. This is John Pugliano, wishing you best returns. Welcome back for another episode of the Wealthsteading Podcast. I'm your host, John Pugliano. I'm also the founder and money manager in investablewealth.com. And in this episode, we're continuing our 10-part series. Today, we're going to be discussing the fifth wealth building principle, which is embrace technology and innovation. So let's jump right into the subject for today. The reason this fifth principle is so important that I have to encourage you to embrace technology innovation is that so many people don't. So many people get caught up in the status quo of just maintaining things as they are. It's part of human nature. Men especially love to be stuck in a rut. We get in our comfort zone and it's hard to get out. Well, there's a famous example of being stuck in the old ways of doing things, and that's from the Luddites in the 19th century. These were English textile workers. This is at a time in history when textiles and clothing were really part of a cottage industry. Fabrics were made by individual artisans, and mechanization and machinery were starting to come into the industry. This is at a time when the Industrial Revolution was getting started. Well, you can imagine what happened. The workers naturally were fearful. They were afraid they were going to lose their jobs. They were afraid that their profit margins would be lowered. They were afraid that they wouldn't have enough capital to purchase this new machinery. Like all things, when someone's economic interests are at hand, you can pretty much predict where their opinion's going to be. Well, so these workers were definitely against industrialization, and they formed interest groups. They tried to get political power. When that didn't work, they formed mobs and rioted and destroyed machinery. You see that happen time and time throughout history. It's the same today. We don't always get mob violence that destroys factories, and nor is it always the working class that is opposed to innovation and technology. In fact, more than not, I would argue that it's the entrenched establishment that are the ones that are really opposed to innovation, and they're the ones that whip up and build the emotions of the working class to take advantage of them. Before we get into that, though, let's just step back and think about this. Like we do in all things in investing and all things with wealthsteading, we're trying to take the emotions out, focus on the here and now, focus on the black and white facts, be realistic about it, and determine how we can shape our individual interactions to make the right choices in our business, in our employment, and in our investing so that we can grow our assets, so ultimately we can be free, we can have more liberty. So we saw the point of view of the Luddites. They were worried they were going to lose their jobs, they were going to lose their livelihood, they were going to lose their source of production. Well, how did that all work out? Imagine today if you had to buy all your clothing from a home-based business that used a spinning wheel to make threads and yarns and small little manual looms to weave the fabric. Well, you definitely wouldn't have the selection, the quality, the fine fabrics that we have today, and surely not at the price they're offered at. So while there was obviously going to be disruption in the artisans that made this clothing, the advent of the machines were good for the overall consumer, and I would argue overall it also is good for the individual worker, because innovation creates automation, automation reduces hazardous working conditions, it eliminates dull and routine jobs. The end result is always productivity increases. No business owner would invest their capital to buy the machinery unless there was clearly a profit to be made from the increase in productivity. So in this case, although we're talking about it benefiting the owner, it still ultimately helps the worker, because the worker can then be employed with that excess capital to do things that are best suited for a human. And a human wasn't made to do dull, boring, repetitive, unsafe tasks. The human mind, the human creativity, when you can unlock that, that's when you can make ultimate profits. And that's when the individual worker can feel their ultimate sense of self-worth and self-enlightenment. Listen, we can make the argument a million different ways. We can see what happened throughout history. We can see what the communists did in China with Mao, or things that Stalin did. Listen, if you want to have a zero unemployment rate, all you need to do is outlaw farm equipment. Make everybody go out in the fields and harvest wheat with a scythe. That'll create plenty of jobs. Is that a job you want? Certainly not a job I want to do. Again, let's bring this back to on a personal level. My paternal grandfather, he was an immigrant from Italy. I've talked about him and will continue to talk about him many times in these podcasts. When he first came to this country, he was 16 years old. He had a third-grade education. He couldn't get employed at anything other than just being a common laborer. Now, later in his life, he eventually did get hired on with the railroad, and he had a better job, but ultimately, he was always a laborer. He made money working from the sweat of his brow and the strength of his back. But as a young man, he told me his main source of income came from basically digging ditches, moving rocks, and he was thankful for that work. But you know what? Today, I have no desire to make my living by digging ditches. Just this week, I needed some landscaping work done on my property. I have these large boulders that I was getting put up on top of my wall in the back of my yard. Without a mechanized machine, it would easily have taken I don't know, 10 or 15 men to move these large boulders and put them in place. This would have been back-breaking work. But you know what? I only had to hire one guy to do it. He came with a mini excavator. This machine was small enough to easily fit on the narrow border of my yard between my house and my neighbor's fence. It had tracks on it, so it was a very stable piece of machinery. It didn't tear up the sod too much on the grass it's already in. And in about an hour, this one man operating this small little machine was able to move a dozen large boulders from my front yard at the street to the backyard of my property line and to cap off my stone wall. This is a machine that, I don't know, new it probably cost something like $80,000, but how much would it cost to employ 10 or 15 men? This is a machine, though, that can be rented. In fact, the man that I hired to do the job, he didn't own the machine. He rented it. I think he said it cost him like $1,000 a week to rent it. He can easily get that to pay back in one day. So this one man becomes an entrepreneur because with a small amount of capital, he can create a business. He can create a service that's needed and wanted in our community. And he can do this without worrying about herniating his disc or crushing his fingers or smashing his foot while he moves around these large, huge boulders. So this man that's an entrepreneur, he's also, an owner-operator. He had to have skill to know how to operate that machinery, and he did a fantastic job with it. Boy, he individually picked those large rocks up and moved them like they were marshmallows. It was unbelievable. It didn't take him very much capital. It's phenomenal. Now, sure, there wasn't jobs for these 10 or 15 men that it would have taken 100 years ago or even 50 years ago. But for this one man, it's making him a very nice living and a safe living. That's the kind of innovation and technology that I support. Now look at my other grandfather, my maternal grandfather. He was a coal miner all of his life. He lived in a coal mining town. Now, younger people listening to this podcast, you may not even know what a company town is, but at one time throughout this country, there were actually whole towns that were owned by an individual company, like a coal mine or a mill, and their employees got to live in these little shanty houses. Well, my grandfather lived in one of those all of his life. He made good money as a coal miner. He rose up from just being an average laborer to being a boss on the job. He was proud of his coal mining roots and traditions. It made him a good living. He supported his family. It also deteriorated his health. He had black lung. I'm sure it reduced his life by probably as much as 30 years. And the last probably 10 or 15 years of his life were lived with very deteriorating health. But that's what he did, and he's loved his job. And I'm glad he had it. He was able to raise his 4 children working there. But you know what? I'm also thankful that I don't have to live in a company town. I'm also thankful that I don't have to go into a coal mine every day. No thanks, I don't want that. I'm happy with the innovation. I'm glad that I can make my money on a computer through the internet, that I can make money off of my assets, that I don't have to make it off of back-breaking labor. I'll take that innovation any day of the week. So why is fear of technology and innovation so prevalent? Well, as I mentioned before, it's part of human nature. We all have fear of the unknown. We get in our comfort zones, and you see this in children, but you see it even more pronounced in older people, senior citizens. They do something a certain way. They just keep doing it that way. They don't want to change. Some of it's laziness. I think more than anything, it's just human nature. You got to remember that the continuous learning requires work. To keep applying new technologies and different things in your life, it requires a lot of work and effort. Hey, right now, on my television, I have no idea how to operate the remote control. Now, I could have done that 20 years ago, but with my current TV, I can barely turn it on, select channels. I surely can't program a recording or anything like that. Now, the bottom line and the reason that I can't do any of that is because I don't watch TV, and so I have no desire to learn how to do it. If watching TV was part of my regular lifestyle, I would have definitely made the effort to learn how to program the TV or learn how to use the remote control. But since I don't really watch television, I don't care. Now, my kids, on the other hand, they obviously know the ins and outs of that remote control. But our fear of change and innovation isn't all human nature. I would argue that there are more nefarious reasons. I think that the powers that be prey on the natural human instincts of wanting to stay in their comfort zone. And so they provide all kinds of disinformation. They provide all kinds of reinforcing things in the media and in our culture to get you to buy into keeping the things the way that they are, to keeping things in the status quo. Your natural tendency to be resistant to change is propagandized by the establishment. Now, why would the establishment do that? What kind of conspiracy am I talking about? Hey, listen, this isn't a tinfoil hat observation. Just look at the entrenched establishment. Look at big corporations. Look at labor unions. And I don't care if you're talking about government postal workers or teacher labor unions or the American Medical Association. All these people want to preserve and protect their existing power. Just like the textile workers in 19th century England. Change and innovation threatens them. It threatens their position. It may cost them money, take away their profit incentive, take away their profit advantage. require them to reinvest capital to keep up with the new equipment or new technology. They may have to go out and learn new skills. The establishment doesn't want to do any of this. We'll talk about the establishment as being the old money. The old money wants to maintain things just the way they are. They like it that way. People like that gravitate to large businesses, large corporations. And then those that can't make it there, that can't make it in a quasi-free market, they tend to gravitate towards government bureaucracies, particularly those that have a preference for power over money. And then these two great establishments propagandize the rest of us to try and keep things the way they are. So you have the moneyed interests, whether they be labor unions or crony capitalists, that want to preserve their profit margins. They ensure that bureaucrats and regulators and politicians stay in power to create laws and regulations that hinder competition and hinder innovation so that the establishment can keep their profit margins high. That's not a crazy conspiracy theory. It happens throughout history. And again, it's part of human nature. When you get to the top of the heap, you want to stay there. You want to remain king of the hill. They've got theirs. They're on top. Once they get up there, they pull the ladder up behind them and they shut the door. They don't want any competitors getting in. They like it at the top. And part of them staying at the top is keeping you at the bottom. And more importantly than keeping you at the bottom, it's enabling you, the mass majority, to hold down those crazy, wild-eyed entrepreneurs with a great idea that want to change things. So how does the establishment keep you paranoid? Well, as I said, there's these organized interest groups, the big crony capitalists, the socialist labor unions. They have think tanks, academia. They fund studies or write articles. They create news pieces. They influence Hollywood scripts and movie lines. All of this to keep you fearful of change. Now, I'm not going to get too much into this during this episode because when we cover the 8th wealth building principle, we're going to talk a great deal more about being able to see through the propaganda. But just suffice it to say that you are propagandized. And it comes through the political establishment, it comes through academia, it comes through the media, it comes through Hollywood. Again, this isn't a conspiracy theory. Hey, I spent about a decade and a half of my life being educated in state-run schools. Just sit in any classroom that's funded by the government. Now, as I said, this propagandizing is easy because it preys on your natural human instincts and fears. Look at any best-selling book. Look at any website that's generating a lot of hits and traffic. The ones that are preaching gloom and doom always have an audience. The gloom and doomers do well in bad times and in good times. They fan the flames of our human frailties, our human fears. And again, this is nothing new. It happens throughout history. Go back to the 18th century with Malthus. He was a late 18th century clergyman. The clergymen were the influential and thought leaders of the day. His pessimism had a major impact on the future social sciences of economics and demographics. Malthus believed that we were all going to starve, that people were overpopulating the earth. Peasants were having too many children. They couldn't grow food fast enough to keep everybody alive and feed everyone. We were going to overpopulate the earth and would all end up starving, just like bacteria dying in an overcrowded petri dish. Now, doesn't that gloom and doom story from over 300 years ago sound just like modern times? Societies love to preach the Armageddon apocalyptic story, whether they're religious people or atheists. Everybody wants to prophesize about how the world's coming to an end. As a kid, when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, all I heard about was environmental crisis and environmental devastation. And hey, I'll admit it, the world was a messy place. I grew up in western Pennsylvania, a beautiful area wrecked by coal mines and steel mills. The lakes and rivers were polluted. The air was filthy, and it needed cleaned up. Hey, I definitely don't deny that. The natural environment there is much better now than it was 40 years ago. But if you would have listened to the gloom and doomers, if you would have listened to the environmental extremists, you'd thought the world was all coming to an end. If acid rain didn't kill us, it would be the hole in the ozone. When those catastrophic prophecies didn't pan out, global warming came onto the extreme and became the new cause celeb. Now, this was in the early 90s, and I find it maybe not coincidental that it also coincided with the fall of the Soviet Union. You have to remember that Russia's #1 export is oil and gas, so their entire economy is really based on petroleum exports. It was in the global powers' best interest to keep us fearful about running out of energy and keeping energy costs high because of environmental concerns and because of CO2 concerns. That helped keep the price of oil high. That kept the very fragile post-Soviet economy of Russia afloat. Still keeps them afloat today. It probably only costs about $25 a barrel to pump oil out of Saudi Arabia, and yet we're paying $103 a barrel as I record this podcast. That delta in pricing keeps the Soviet Union afloat, keeps them liquid, and it keeps all the banks and the other capitalist institutions that either profit from Russia or have loaned Russia billions of dollars. It keeps them all afloat as well, keeps them all liquid. So you can see this might be one way where preachers of the gloom and doom aren't doing it because they believe in apocalypse. They're doing it because it lines their pockets. Hey, think back just a few years ago. As late as 2008, people were hysterical over peak oil. Now, I have been hearing the same old peak oil hysteria since the mid-1970s during the Arab oil crisis. But the fact is, we haven't run out of oil. We're not going to run out of petroleum products anytime soon. This year, the United States will become the #1 world producer of oil. That hasn't happened since, like the 1940s. This country has cut OPEC imports by more than half in the last 5 years. And it's not because we're using less, it's because we're producing more. North America is awash in oil and natural gas. The state of North Dakota alone, now this is not a state like Oklahoma or Texas, or the Gulf Coast, which is known for its oil reserves. This is a fairly innocuous energy state. They're producing over 1 million barrels of oil a day, and that's expected to maybe double in the next year or two. That's about a third of what we're importing from OPEC, just from little old North Dakota. The reason I bring the hysteria over peak oil up is because the oil boom we're experiencing now, it isn't because of the energy policies that were forced on us by the politicians. The oil boom isn't occurring because of the pressure the environmental groups have put on industry. This bonanza in oil isn't coming from anything the White House is doing, or work of the Congress, or the Energy Department, or the EPA, or any regulatory group. It's coming in spite of all those people. In fact, it's not even coming because of the interests of the big global energy companies. People like ExxonMobil, they've had almost nothing to do about the energy boom that's been occurring over the last 5 years. Remember, these multinational energy companies, they're the entrenched bureaucracy. They like keeping things exactly the way they are. They like all the government regulation and all the bureaucracy. They like the restrictions on drilling. Why do you think they keep the government power structure in place? So what brought about this energy boom? Well, it was the wildcatters. It was these small little energy companies. Small little gas and petroleum companies owned by either individuals or a small consortium of investors. These were the people that went out and took the risk. These were the people that went to obscure places like North Dakota. These were the people that invested in technology. And it's important to point out here, technology that they've used to bring this boom about, it wasn't necessarily revolutionary. They obviously didn't have to have the R&D or the CapEx budgets of ExxonMobil to make it happen because they didn't have that kind of money. You hear all about fracking, how fracking has revolutionized this energy boom. And it's true, but you know what? Fracking is only half or maybe less than half of the story. The other part of the equation is horizontal drilling. Now, fracking itself has been around since about 1948 or 1949, so there's nothing new there. But the convergence of the fracking technology with horizontal drilling, that's what made the difference. And horizontal drilling has been brought about because of innovations in robotics, big data and number crunching and data storage of computer systems and software, all the intricate sensors and control systems that they have now, and the advancements made in material science. We can not only drill down a mile or two into the earth and frack, we can drill down a mile and then drill sideways a mile. It's amazing. It's revolutionary. It's why they're able to pull oil and natural gas out of places where they could never get it before. Big energy companies like Shell and ExxonMobil, they've ignored those deposits because it was too inconvenient for them to go there. They already had contracts and leases on deep water drilling, land leases that were favored by government regulation and government control. It was these small little companies, these small little wildcatters that didn't have access to those energy leases. They were trying to figure out how to apply this technology to the land that they could afford to lease and own to drill for natural gas and oil. So these small little wildcatters and their companies, they embraced this new technology of horizontal drilling and merged it with an old technology of fracking. It was their guts and their determination that have brought this oil boom about. And this is not unique to energy. This happens again and again throughout time and throughout every industry. Think of the computer and software technology innovators of the last 30 years. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, people like Michael Dell. These are mostly young college kids innovating, creating software and building computers in their dorm rooms. Steve Jobs even dropped out. He couldn't even put up with college. These weren't people that worked for the big technology companies of the day like Hewlett-Packard or IBM. These were renegade innovators, wildcatters in their own right. And this is why we have to embrace and encourage and promote entrepreneurs like these men. We can't be jealous of them. What do we care if Gates and Jobs became billionaires? Think of how your life has been improved. I'll tell you, my life has been sure improved by these men. There's no way that I could have the lifestyle or the earning capacity that I do if it wasn't for Steve Jobs and Bill Gates. They're entitled to all the billions they made. Technological innovation, it breeds competition. Competition brings us new methods, new products, new services. That then creates a higher quality, a higher standard of living for us at a lower cost. It makes life better for everyone. The rich and the poor, everyone wins. Forget the propaganda you hear today about income inequality. It's the same argument every election cycle. pitting the rich against the poor. The argument's always about the disparity between the rich and the poor, but when government or big business or unions get in and they have their way, it's the middle class that suffers. Come on, look at our standard of living. Our poor people have extremely high standards of living, and that's if you compare them to affluent people in developing parts of the world. Our poor people have central heating, they have air conditioning, they have all the food they want. Let's face the facts. Our poor people are fat. The biggest problem affecting our poor people is heart disease and diabetes. So don't be a Luddite. If you want to accept the philosophy of wealthsteading, where you can increase your freedom and your liberty by building your assets and creating a life where you can live off of your own investment income, then you need to embrace innovation and technology. Start in your business and professional life. Don't be afraid to learn new technologies. Keep yourself fresh. Keep yourself relevant in the economy. Whether you're the boss or the manager or whether you're an employee, you need to find new ways to integrate technology so that you can remain relevant, so that you can increase your productivity, and that'll allow you to stay competitive. If you don't, you'll lose your job or your company will lose its market share. Just look at a simple example from my own life. This podcast acts like my own radio show. It gives me access to thousands of people that I could have otherwise never met. It allows me to promote my business and my philosophies on investing in a way that I could have never done just a few years ago. And I can do it for virtually free. No big radio station or broadcasting network telling me I can't have my own show. There are no gatekeepers. The only limitations holding me back in creating a fabulous podcast with millions of listeners are my own inabilities. Embrace innovation and technology in your own personal life. Use things like Facebook and Twitter and Skype to stay in touch with family and loved ones and old friends. You know, over the last 40 years, I've moved around a lot. I've lived in different countries. I've traveled throughout the world, all these many places. I always made new friends, but I lost contact with old friends. We didn't have the technology and the media that we have today. It's so much easier to stay in touch. Think about how you can build your own personal relationships, your own personal capital that way. Think about the freedom that technology provides to us, especially as we get older, or for the people that are disabled. The automation that's available today to help senior citizens and people that are hearing or visually impaired, these are phenomenal changes in people's lives. It creates freedom and liberty. It could have never happened 30 years ago. Just as a sidebar example, I was talking to my friend the other day. He had just gotten back from a trip to Israel. He'd been out of the country for several weeks. He's a dog owner like everyone with pets. He was concerned about leaving his dog at a kennel. But because of technology, while he was in his hotel room in Israel, he was able to go to the internet, to log on to his kennel's website, to look at the webcam and see that his dog was happy and healthy and playing with the other animals. He was also able, because of the phone in his hotel room, which used voice over internet protocol, he was able to call back to the United States, talk to the owners of the kennel, and see how his dog was doing. Now, he could do this free of charge. It didn't cost him a penny to access the internet, to look at the webcam, to see his dog on the screen, nor did it cost him any money to make the phone call. It was all done over the internet, free of charge for him, covered by the cost of his hotel room. Not only would it have been impossible as little as 20 years ago for him to use a technology to be able to see the dog through the webcam, but to make a phone call from Israel to the United States would have been cost prohibitive for most people. We live in an amazing world. Technology and innovation drastically improves our quality of life. And you need to embrace this as an investor as well. Regardless about how you may feel about a topic, put your feelings aside. You need to invest with your head, not with your heart. Overcome your natural tendency to fear new things. Overcome your natural tendency to be afraid of things that you don't know about or things you don't understand. You need to invest in technology. You need to invest in companies that are invested in technology. You need to invest in companies that are investing in innovation. As best as you can, try and understand and learn these new technologies. You know, when we talk about high tech, it's not just about computers and software. When we talk about technology, break down that word. Think about what it means. Technology. It's the study of technique. Technology isn't about computers or software. Many people, when they hear that word, that's all they think about today. Technology is just about improving things, innovating things. How do you hit a golf ball farther? You go out and improve your technique. You improve your swing. You improve your timing. That's technology. How do you get better at playing a musical instrument? You improve your technique. You practice. You develop muscle memory. Whether it's music or art or industry, everything gets better through technology by improving our technique. So as an investor, it's your responsibility to understand what new techniques are out there, what's being innovated, how can you make money and profit from those companies that are participating in them. Now, the biggest reason why it's important for all of us to embrace technology and innovation is because if you don't, you're going to lose. You're fighting a losing battle. Innovation always wins. It's the condition of mankind to innovate, to improve his surroundings, to improve the quality of his life. If mankind ever fails to do that, we'll fail as a species. It doesn't matter what kind of propaganda war the corporate crony capitalists, government bureaucrats, or the labor unions, it doesn't matter what any of them try and impose on us. The status quo will not remain the same. The entrenched powers will eventually lose. They always do. The Roman Empire fell. The British Empire collapsed. The Soviet Union fell apart. Every society, every company, every government, every individual that doesn't embrace innovation eventually fails. It doesn't matter how big they are. It doesn't matter how powerful they are. People living in the Roman Empire never thought it would fall apart. People living in Britain in their heyday before World War I would have never thought the sun could set on the British Empire. Well, it did. Just look at history. Look at individual industries. See how they change. We've talked a lot about energy. Think about the energy industry. Mankind started satisfying their need for energy by burning wood. Then eventually that evolved to burning coal. It was only about 100 years ago that all the houses in America were lit by kerosene lamps. That's unthinkable today. Electricity, electric lighting, Thomas Edison. That's what replaced kerosene. Now our energy demands today are all mostly petrochemical. Petroleum-based oil and natural gas. It won't last forever. It'll change. It may be 50, 100, 1,000 years. I don't know what it'll be, but it'll change. We've talked about Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, Michael Dell. Think about how computers have changed in your lifetime. 60 years ago, computers were dominated by mainframes. These were companies like International Business Machine, IBM. They're insignificant today. The mainframe was pushed aside by the personal computer. And then we had laptops, tablets. Now people carry around smartphones with more computing power than the space shuttle used. I mentioned IBM. They're fairly insignificant today. Microsoft is finding it very hard to compete. If these companies don't innovate, they'll be gone. I think back to my childhood. United States Steel. It was unthinkable that they would go out of business. Pan Am. They were the international airlines. They were bankrupt by the early 90s. Stalwart retailers like Woolworth. People never thought these corporate giants would fail. But if you don't innovate, you die. Now I know there are some disbelievers among you, and I'm not saying it's all utopia. I know it's not. There are always problems and bumps along the way. Innovation isn't a straight line up. It ebbs and flows. We can see problems in history. Let's look back to the 19th century. Infant mortality rates skyrocketed. In some places they were as high as 75% because the doctors of that day, the supposed innovators, the supposed people that had the wisdom and the technology, they weren't washing their hands. As this new field of medicine was going around birthing children, they were promoting disease. They caused these unhygienic conditions of doctors, caused these extreme infant mortality rates. It was the knowledge and the wisdom of the midwives that kept things clean, that knew how to be hygienic. It was they that used the wisdom of millennia, that birthed children in a safe and effective manner. So then eventually, the new technology of medicine caught up. They went back and became rational. They looked at the ancient wisdom. They adopted more hygienic methods. It was a setback, but eventually innovation played out, and the efficacy of medicine eventually superseded that of the midwives. It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't utopia. But again, eventually, technology and innovation brought us a higher standard of living in terms of healthcare. We see similar problems today with our industrial food syndicate. Because our food industry is based on cheap inputs like corn and soybean, our people are plagued with obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer. These aren't conditions we have to live with. Eventually, technology and innovation will improve our food industry. We'll find better ways of farming. We'll go back to some of the ancient wisdom that we've forgotten. We'll re-embrace that, and we'll look at it and apply it in the light of the scientific knowledge that we have today, and things will get better. We won't have to live with these debilitating diseases that are self-inflicted because of the cheap and poor quality food that we now eat. Things will eventually get better. So as we wrap up this episode, I want you to commit to embracing technology. Get out of your comfort zone. Displace your fears. Use your discernment. Use your knowledge and wisdom. Use that to apply technology and innovation in a way that's advantageous to your personal life, to your business, and to your investment income. It's the only way you have to improve your standard of living. Learn to make money off of technology by investing in those industries that are favoring trends in innovation. And I promise you those will be featured topics of upcoming episodes. For now, though, I invite you to join me in our next podcast when we'll discuss the sixth wealth building principle, which is how to profit from trends. As always, I welcome your comments, and if you have any questions that you'd like to hear us answer on future episodes, please contact me through our website at wealthsteading.com. Wishing you the best of returns. This is John Pugliano. Welcome to the Wealthsteading Podcast. I'm John Pugliano, your host. I'm the founder and money manager at investablewealth.com, and today we're continuing our 10-part series on wealth building. Each episode we're reviewing and focusing on one of the wealth building principles. Today we're picking up on number 6, which is profit from trends. Now, profiting from trends is a key element to building wealth. I attribute my own financial independence to my ability over the years to have increased my portfolio by trading in and out of markets. Now, I was never smart enough to get out exactly at the top, nor to get back in exactly at the bottom. But on average, over nearly 30 years, I was able to consistently build my portfolio and build quite a nice little nest egg. So in this podcast, I want to focus a little bit about trading these trends. And this goes directly against the conventional wisdom. Everything you hear in the media, everything you read in the financial news, all the talking heads on TV, they're always telling you buy and hold, buy and hold. Investment advisors love to tell you to buy and hold. Think about it. From a mutual fund or an investment advisor's perspective, it makes their job a lot easier. They take your money, they put it into one investment, and they keep it there. They sit on it. How easy is that for them? Now, I don't know that that's necessarily good for you. I'm not giving you investment advice over this podcast. I'm just telling you, you should maybe rethink what you're hearing from the mainstream media and see how that's really working in your own life. So what I'm talking about is trading trends, active trading, what I call in my firm active portfolio management or active trading. And that's as opposed to just buying and holding or dollar cost averaging. Now, I've already told you it's what I attribute my financial success to, but let's get down and dig a little bit more in the weeds here. First of all, even though I was always a trend trader, 6 or 7 years ago, I still thought buying and holding and dollar cost averaging was the best thing for most people. I thought that because that's what I'd been told all my life. Listen to any mainstream financial broadcaster advice, something like NPR, and that's all you're going to hear. Hey, you're not smart enough to get in and out of these trends. Just buy and hold. Over the long run, the market always goes up. Warren Buffett made his money by buying and holding. Well, there are some truths in those statements, but I think there's some myth-truths as well. First of all, let's look at Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett's name is always invoked when the subject of buy and hold comes up. And it is true that Warren Buffett said that his favorite holding period is forever. And it is true that he tends to hold on to investments for a long time. Look at Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway's. Every quarter they announce capital gains. Now, unless they're actively trading, how are they making capital gains? If they held on everything and never traded, they'd only have dividends and investment income. But they do actively trade, not like a hedge fund, but they do frequently trade, and that's why they have capital gains. The other famous quote from Warren Buffett is totally counter to buy and hold. And that quote that he's famous for is that you should buy when others are fearful and be fearful when others are buying. Well, I will argue that quote that he gives is totally about trend trading. It's certainly not about buy and hold. He's specifically telling you in that quote to get out of the market when people are irrationally exuberant and to get in the market when everyone else is panicking and selling. That's clearly a variation of trend trading. And look at Buffett's personal performance. Just to look at one of Warren Buffett's recent transactions where he lost a lot of money was on an energy company. Back when he thought that we were going to have peak oil and oil was trading at $145 a barrel and he thought he could make some good profits in it, he went in and bought a major position in an energy company. Well, since the recession and since this energy boom has gone on primarily because of fracking and horizontal drilling, there is no peak oil. Oil prices have come down drastically from $145 a barrel. As I record this podcast, they're down to $103. So needless to say, Warren Buffett lost a lot of money on his petroleum company acquisition. And so he's since spun it off, which again shows that if he was really going to buy and hold forever, he would assume that, hey, someday oil will go back up and he would hold on to that position. But he didn't. I don't remember exactly what his holding period was, but I believe it was under 6 years. So again, when people tell you Warren Buffett buys and holds forever, it's not true. And you shouldn't either. Now I'll repeat again, I've always trend traded. But a few years ago, I did think that buy and hold and dollar cost averaging was probably right for most investors. And I thought that because it was hammered into my head. It's all I ever heard. It's all I ever read. Well, all that changed for me in 2008. In 2008, 2009, I saw the market plunge, and I saw people that had their retirement accounts, their 401k plans, their IRAs. I saw those plummeting, going down in many cases 40 or 50%. People's life savings was wiped out. Now you can say, sure, buy and hold and it'll come back. And it has over the past 5 years. But you know what? It didn't come back until the fall of 2013. Think about that. So from the recession of 2008 to 2009, the market didn't come back until the fall of 2013. And that's coming back considering real dollars, inflation adjusted. So it would have taken you about 5 years to get your money back. Now let's think about that. What if you were going to retire in those 5 years? What if you were counting on those investments to generate income for you? What if you had a major expense? What if your daughter was getting married or there was a major medical expense you had to pay for? What if just before that you'd been planning on taking that money out and making a major purchase like a home? You see, when they tell you that you're better off dollar cost averaging and staying in the market, that's true over the long term. They'll quote statistics, but those statistics they quote, they go all the way back to the 1800s. And yes, because the American economy has continued to grow, any 100 or 80-year period you look at, you're going to be ahead. You're probably going to come out averaging, somewhere between 6 to 12%. But the problem is we don't invest for 87 years. We only work for about 30 or 40 years. And that's when we're doing our major wealth building and our major investing. So we're saving and earning and building wealth over 30 or 40 years. And then we're going to start drawing that down as we get older, as we retire. The market doesn't continuously go up in a straight pattern. It goes up and it downs, it ebbs and it flows. Your high income earning years, when you're putting a lot away for retirement, might just be that decade or that 20-year period where the market's going down or the market's going sideways or the market's so volatile it's going up for 3 years and then down for 5. The market's unpredictable. To say that you should buy and hold or that you should dollar cost average in regardless, to me that's irresponsible. I think you have to look at current market conditions and then determine whether you should be in or out of the market, whether you should be in cash or whether you should be in stocks. And much about what I'll talk about in this podcast is dealing with stocks, but the same holds true with bonds. Bonds tend to move in 30 or 60-year cycles. They'll go up for 30 years, they'll go down for 30 years. It's a generational thing. We'll talk more about that in another podcast, but I think a lot of that has to do with one generation being a saver and then the next generation squandering that wealth. So if you were holding on to bonds from about 1980 until the present, you've probably done pretty well because as the yields have gone down, the bond prices have gone up. They work inversely. And so a bond fund would have paid off nicely for you. But that may not be the case going forward. Interest rates are at historic lows. The Fed funds rate is near zero. It can only either hold here or go up. It really can't go down much further. So that either means that your bonds are going to hold their value or they're going to decrease in value. The chance of them appreciating doesn't seem very promising. And again, this is just a standard trend. They happen to in recent history be happening about every 30 years. The same thing would have happened to you if you'd have been holding bonds from 1950 through 1980. The yields on in bonds went up from 1950 to 1980. Consequently, the price of bonds went down. If you were in a bond fund, you would have lost your principal value. So for someone to tell you that, hey, you should go to safety, you should put your money in bonds, or you're getting older, you're getting near retirement, you should be putting your money in bonds, that's irresponsible. You shouldn't be putting your money in bonds unless you think the bonds are going to hold their value or go up. If we're in an environment where interest rates are going up, bonds will surely lose their value. And it doesn't matter whether you're retirement or whether you're looking for safety. You should not be going into bonds if interest rates are going up because your principal will go down. So here's a problem with the crash that happened during the last recession. I don't know if it was most people, but certainly many people sold. They sold at the wrong time. They sold at the bottom. But hey, can you blame them for that? They lost 40 or 50% of their savings. They were afraid the market could keep going down, and they pulled out. That wasn't necessarily the wrong thing to do. They should have pulled out, however, when they lost 10% or 15% or 20%. None of us can know when the bottom's going to come. And that's why investment professionals that I follow, like Bill O'Neill, he'll tell you cut your losses at 8%. Bill O'Neill tries to never lose more than 5 to 8% in his trading portfolios. I think that's wise advice. Now, it can't always be done because of the volatility of the market or maybe the volatility of the individual stock you're in. And that's even if you set a stop loss order. And we won't cover that in this podcast, but in future orders we will get into some details like that. But you should have a target. Certainly, you don't ever want to lose more than 10% of your portfolio. But in the last recession, people did, and they panicked, and it's natural. And again, if you listen to what Warren Buffett said, when everybody was panicking, that was the time to buy. But likewise, in Warren Buffett's quote, the time to sell would have been in 2006, 2007, when the markets were exuberant, when people were buying houses when they had no money, and when people thought the stock market was just going to keep going up. That was irrational exuberance, similar to what we saw with the dot-com bubble. It wasn't based on technology stocks. It wasn't based on penny stocks that had a story and no profits, but it was still irrational exuberance. And if you were following trends, you would have seen that the market had broke its trend in 2007, 2008, and it would have been a good time to get out. And so in 2008, 2009, when I saw people's savings wiped out, that's when I realized that buy and hold wasn't a good strategy for the average person. I knew that swing trading was right for me, and I can't say that it's right for everybody, but I will tell you I don't think that buy and hold is right for everybody for these reasons that I've mentioned. Markets fluctuate. They've always fluctuate. They're always going to fluctuate. There will always be a downturn, whether it's in bonds or whether it's in stocks. You need to find a strategy that works for you to get in and out of that. And again, like I say with my own strategy, I never get out at the top exactly. I never get in at the bottom exactly. That would be perfection. Whether you get out a little bit early or a little bit late, or you get in a little early or a little late, you're not going to be perfect, but it's still better than sitting through a total market meltdown. So why do these trends occur? Let's think about this. Nothing stays the same. We've talked about this in previous podcasts. The market's constantly changing. Societal demographics change. We go into war. We go into peace. We go into periods of prosperity. We go into periods of recession. Consumers are fickle. They change their mind about what they like and what they don't like. There are natural disasters. There are periods of scarcity, maybe because of weather patterns or tsunamis. We can't predict what's going to happen in the future. But the market does react. And if you follow those trends, you can try and get in and out to protect your savings. Right now, people are telling us that China is going to take over. They're going to be the dominant economy. The Chinese yuan is going to become the reserve currency. The American market, people will tell us that the American market is doomed and the American dollar may not be used as a reserve currency. Well, you know what? I don't know. I have no idea if the American dollar will continue to be a reserve currency. I can actually make some arguments to why it may be better for us that it wasn't the reserve currency. Either way, I have no idea what's going to happen in the future 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I am a student of history and I have a long memory. And I can remember in my own lifetime, just 25 years ago, people were saying the exact same things about Japan that they are today saying about China. And I'll tell you, they were much more believable about Japan than they are about China because Japan has always been a quality economy. Japan has always produced quality products. Japan not only had a large export manufacturing base, they were experts at research and development and creating strong brands. None of that can be said for China. Yes, China is a manufacturer of the world, but they have poor quality, they have a poor reputation for integrity. Read the newspapers today. People are afraid to buy dog food from China because they think their dogs are going to get poisoned. What does that tell you about the Chinese economy? Now again, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I can't predict what's going to happen in the future. But when it comes to trends, I can look at both China and Japan. Both of those countries are in a demographic death spiral. They don't have enough young children to support their aging population. Now that's true across the developed world, but it's especially true in Japan and even China. The one-child policy that China's had for these many decades is putting them into a tailspin. And you can't have a growing economy when you have a declining population. Just think about that. Now that's a trend that we can see. So that can tell us something about maybe where we'll put our future investment dollars. Now I don't know exactly what that means, but I suspect what it means is that in the coming years, 10 or 20 years down the road, certainly in the next generation, both Japan and China are going to be in a much harder place than the United States is. So that's a trend you want to watch for. We see these trends in companies as well. In previous podcasts, we've talked about the way the computer industry has evolved just over the last 30 years. How going back 50 or 60 years ago, IBM used to dominate with a mainframe computer, and then that was replaced by a personal computer. Companies like Apple or Microsoft, they became dominant players. And then as we got into the mid and late 90s, the internet came online. That brought in a whole new cast of players. America Online, CompuServe, Yahoo. Companies come and go. Do you remember Nexus Lexus? They were the search engine before Google. If you wanted to know anything that was said in the media, you went to LexisNexis. Now virtually no one knows who they are. Think about all the companies that have changed. In the early 90s, Motorola was rapidly becoming the king of cell phones. They were really pioneering that new emerging industry. When was the last time you saw a Motorola phone? Go back to the 80s. Do you remember Sony's Walkman? They dominated the portable music industry. Have you seen anybody carrying a Walkman around lately? Motorola lost their cell phone business to a host of companies. BlackBerry was one of them, but now BlackBerry's gone. For the most part, they've all been replaced by Apple and Samsung. That's today. Who knows what will happen tomorrow? And the Sony Walkman, what happened to that? Well, that was predominantly replaced by Apple also. The iPod and the iPhone, they've revolutionized the way that we listen to music. The iTunes store has totally changed the way you purchase music. When was the last time you saw a record shop? In fact, when was the last time you saw a record? That's technology. That's how things change. They innovate. Companies go through a life cycle. They grow, and if they falter, they get replaced by someone else. That's why you can't buy and hold. That's why you have to try and trade with the trends. Companies not only come and go, entire markets go through trends. In fact, that's what a trend is. Turn on the TV and you'll hear people talking about, oh, we're in a bull market. Oh, no, we're in a bear market. The market is constantly ebbing and flowing, and it's not just one or two stocks that do that. By definition, to have a market trend, you have to have the majority of the stocks moving in one way or the other, either up or down. They're all moving together. The good stocks and the bad stocks, they're all going up when the market goes up. The good stocks and the bad stocks, they're all going down when the market's going down. Oh, I say all, that's a bit of an exaggeration. You understand what I'm saying. If you study bear and bull markets, you'll come to realize that in a bear market, at least 70 to 75% of the stocks are going down. In a bull market, in an uptrend, it's just the other way. 70 to 75% at least of the stocks are moving up. That's why it's called a market trend. So you can use that to your advantage. If we're going into a downturn, you want to get out. You don't want to buy and hold. Because again, by definition, 70 to 75% of stocks at least are going to go down. What's the chances that you're holding on to the 20 or the 25% that are going to stay flat or maybe even go up? And again, look at the recession of 2008. At one point, all asset classes went down. Stocks, bonds, precious metals. For a while there in the summer of 2008 into the fall, everything fell apart. Cash was the only safe place to hide. I don't want to belabor the point, but buy and hold just doesn't work. And think about it. Your own common sense tells you that. Buy and hold assumes that you can set it and forget it. You can just put your money away for 20 or 30 or 40 years and not worry about it, and everything will be fine when you want to retire. Do you really believe that? You can't put anything away. Look at your grass or your garden. What happens if you don't mow your grass? What happens if you don't pull weeds out of your garden? Everything needs maintenance. Your portfolio is no different. You have to prune off the bad stocks and you have to reinvest in stocks that are growing. That's why I believe in an active trading portfolio. Okay, I know some of you are really skeptical and you're not going to believe what I say, and that's fine. Give it time, keep listening to this podcast, and I'll be able to give you examples as we look at real-world, real-time situations, and then you'll be able to judge for yourself. But let me make a few more arguments. First of all, the experts are going to tell you, well, you just need to buy and hold. Just put it in an index fund. And again, everything will be all right in 10 or 20 years. Well, look at the index funds. Every quarter or every 6 months or so, they change the index funds. Look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average. It's the top 30 blue chip stocks in America. Just in the last year or so, they reevaluated the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the top 30 stocks. They threw out Alcoa, Hewlett-Packard, Bank of America. They replaced them with Nike, Visa, and Goldman Sachs. Now, if the indexes are changing, why shouldn't your individual portfolio be changing? Why shouldn't you be pruning it all along? Why should you wait for a stock like Alcoa to perform so abysmally for so many years that it finally gets thrown out of the index? Why not just trim it out of your portfolio long before that happens? Be ahead of the trend. And it's not just the Dow. It happens in the S&P. It happens in the Russell 2000. It happens in every index. And that's because the professional money managers, the people that tell you to buy and hold, they don't buy and hold. They actively trade. Let me make another point. You're probably saying to yourself, oh, John, this sounds all right, but hey, what about the point of buying stocks on sale? The argument that they make for dollar cost averaging is that even when the market's down, if you're constantly putting away the same amount of money, you're buying stocks when they're on sale, and so your money's growing over time. Yeah, sure, that's true. But think of the corollary to that. If they think it's such a good idea to buy stocks when they're on sale, why wouldn't it be a good idea to take some profits when the market's at an all-time high and wait for things to settle down and go back on sale again? You see, this is why you should be skeptical. They're always telling you, buy and hold, buy and hold. Dollar cost average in, buy stocks when they're on sale. But they're never telling you to get out. The point of owning stocks is not to keep them forever. The point of owning stocks is to make a profit and to take that money and do something else with it. Buy a home, buy a car, go on a vacation, help the people you love with it, give some money to charity. But that's not what you hear from the financial industry. You just hear from them, buy and hold. Okay, one last argument. For those of you that are hard to convince, I know you're saying, okay, John, fine enough. Sure, the market's dropped 40, 50% in 2008, but they have bounced back. Things got better by the end of 2013. And right now, as I record this podcast in 2014, hey, with inflation, we're ahead of where we were. Things have never been better. See, it shows if you just buy and hold long enough, and if you don't sell at the bottom, you'll be fine. Well, that is true enough, and I mentioned that earlier. Even with inflation, the markets have caught back up and surpassed themselves over the last 5 or 6 years. But think back a little farther than that. Let's go back to the dot-com bubble of 2000. Do you realize that if you were in the NASDAQ in the summer of 2000, when it was trading, I believe, at over 5,000, it's never gotten back there. The NASDAQ now is around 4,300, and that's in nominal terms. So in the last 14 years, the NASDAQ index that has the high-tech and the growth stocks in it, in over 14 years, it has not nominally gotten back to where it was in the summer of 2000. Think about it. That's been 14 years. That's nominal terms. To make up for inflation, the Nasdaq's going to have to get well beyond 5,000. We're talking 13 years of your money being devaluated. The Nasdaq's probably got to get to 7,000, 8,000 just to get your money back. So you're looking at holding on to the Nasdaq for maybe 20, 25 years, 30 years to get your money back in what you would have lost had you stayed in it back in 2000. Okay, maybe I can't convince you in this one podcast, but keep listening. Keep thinking about trading trends. Come back and listen to future podcasts and see if you can learn to identify these trends. And then maybe you'll be a little bit less convinced that buy and hold is the right thing. And the next time there's a downturn, you'll try and get out early. Or for that matter, in periods like now when we're seeing stocks at all-time highs, maybe you'll take some profits. I don't know of anybody that's lost money taking a profit. Again, what you never or seldom hear financial professionals saying is that cash is an option. You don't always have to own stocks or bonds. You can own cash. Go into a money market fund and just ride things out for a little bit. That's an option that you have, and for the short term, oftentimes it's your safest option. Well, this wraps up the 6th wealth building principle, profit from trends. It's a bit of a controversial topic, but I encourage you to think about it and ponder it. And I also invite you back to our next episode, where we'll cover the 7th principle, which is profit from nature. If you have comments about the show or questions you'd like to hear answered on future episodes, you can contact me via our website, wealthsteading.com. I thank you for listening, and as always, I wish you the best of returns. This is John Pugliano. Welcome to the Wealthsteading Podcast. This is John Pugliano. I'm the money manager and founder of investablewealth.com. And today, we're going to be discussing the 7th wealth building principle, which is profit from nature. Now, if you'll recall, our previous episode was profit from trends. And you may think this is redundant, and although it is very similar, there is a distinction. When we talk about profiting from nature, it might be a little more nuanced, but think of it the way they differentiate economics. They talk about macroeconomics and microeconomics. So when we think of trends, let's think of trends in regard to what you can put on a chart. The performance of a stock, the performance of an index, statistics for a particular country, gross domestic product, unemployment, profit loss, things of that nature. Now, as I say, when we talk about profiting from nature, it's a little bit more nuanced, and it can be argued that ultimately nature is what underlies all the other trends. And by definition, that's probably true, because without mankind, without Mother Nature, there wouldn't be a stock market. There wouldn't be any profit or loss. So ultimately, yes, all of nature drives trends. But again, think of macroeconomics, microeconomics. When we speak of profiting from nature, we're going to be zeroing in specifically on events. In terms of nature, there are really 2 types of nature. We're going to break it down into 3, but at a high level, let's look at the first 2. There's Mother Nature, so floods, drought, hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes. And then there's human nature. You know human nature: fear, greed, love, hate. So again, we can think of the forces of nature basically as being the trend behind the trend. And that's what we're going to discuss in today's episode, and why it's important for you to be able to recognize these so you can profit from them. And like we talked about on the episode on identifying value, we want to focus not only on how you can profit from nature in terms of your investment portfolio, but also how you would do it in terms of your personal life. So in the previous episode talked about trends, you can think of that more in terms of quantitative analysis, plotting the performance of a stock or an index on a chart. That's very quantitative. What we're going to talk about in this episode, as it regards to nature, is going to be similar trends, but this is going to be more qualitative. Again, thinking in terms of human nature, fear and greed. A little harder to quantify, but nonetheless very important when it comes to understanding how the markets work. Now, I mentioned that there are basically 2 types of nature. There's Mother Nature, you might call them acts of God, and then there's human nature. Now, a subcategory underneath human nature would be the action of government. In our times, government is so ubiquitous and so omnipresent and omnipowerful. I've broken government out as its own separate category within the nature. So we're going to talk of Mother Nature, human nature, and then government. So let's talk about Mother Nature first. As I've already mentioned, Mother Nature is going to create very event-driven trends. A hurricane, a tsunami, an earthquake, a tornado, a drought, an epidemic or a pandemic. As we mentioned Mother Nature and I talked about hurricanes, a joke comes to mind, and I've got to tell it to you. I know I shouldn't do this, and I know it's going to insult some people, but sometimes when we look at the state of our economy, We just have to tell some jokes to get us to laugh to keep us from crying. So if you've heard this before, excuse me. If this insults you, I apologize ahead of time. What does a hurricane in Florida, a tornado in Oklahoma, and a divorce in Tennessee all have in common? Somebody's going to lose a mobile home. Now you can see why I'm a money manager and not a comedian. So let's get back to these events of Mother Nature. You can understand how these would affect the market or perhaps affect your profitability. Do you remember the tsunami that engulfed Japan in Fukushima? It caused flooding of their nuclear reactors. It left much of the country without power, shutting down industrial production. Companies like Honda and Toyota were definitely affected, as were many other Japanese industries. So you could have had an opportunity to short their market and make a profit. Just preceding that, there was major flooding. I believe it was in Malaysia. It shut down many factories that manufactured integrated circuits for the computer industry. It affected deliveries on products like smartphones, microprocessors. Again, there was money to be made in that disaster. A few years back, I was in Europe on business. This is when the Icelandic volcano erupted, and it shut down air travel across the Atlantic for, I don't remember exactly, I think it was close to 2 weeks, 10 days. I was supposed to leave France and fly to India, but my flight was canceled, and I couldn't get a flight back to the States. I ended up being stuck in Paris for about 4 or 5 days. I use stuck loosely because since almost all business came to a halt, I ended up doing some awesome sightseeing. Notre Dame, Versailles, the Louvre. It was the best business trip I was ever on. I linked up with some other employees from my company. We were eventually able to get a rental car and drive from Paris down to Madrid and catch a flight from Spain to the U.S. Now I bring this up for 2 reasons. One is on a personal level. We got word that the transatlantic flights were going to be delayed, but at the time we had no idea that it would take so long. And we knew the farther south in Europe you went, the easier it would be to get a flight out. So when word first broke about the eruption, looking back with hindsight, we should have engaged a rental car to hedge against the possibility of our flights being canceled. If our flights weren't canceled, we could have just gotten rid of the rental car or kept it for a few days and it would have been a minor expense. As it was, because everybody was trying to get into Southern Europe, all the rental cars were taken, and it was very difficult for us to find one. So looking back, as I say, as a precaution, we could have spent a few dollars and gotten the rental car ahead of time, just in case as an insurance policy. Of course, as I said, I didn't mind being stranded in Paris for 4 or 5 days. I got some great sightseeing in. The other reason I bring this up is on the investor level. Because flights were disrupted for around 10 days, the airlines took a hit on their earnings for that quarter. Again, that would have been an opportunity to short the stock or to sell it early at the first sign of danger so that you didn't suffer a loss in airline stocks. Now, I didn't dig into the details, but I would imagine that rental cars actually had a nice profit that quarter. So again, that could have been an opportunity to short or sell the airlines and buy the rental car companies. Just one small example. Think of all the other events that occur that you could profit from. Remember Katrina? What a nightmare that was? Now, I know some of you are saying, John, you're just a heartless maggot. How can you think of profiting during these disasters and tragedies? Okay, now let's get back to reality. Remember how we always talk about when it comes to building wealth, we want to focus on the facts. We want to focus on the black and white. When a natural disaster occurs, whether it's Katrina or the Fukushima tsunami or an earthquake in Haiti, whatever it is, there's going to be pain and suffering. Now, if you don't make a profit, or even if you suffer a loss as a result of that because you didn't take action, how does that help anybody? How do you help earthquake victims in Haiti because you either didn't make money or lost money? How do you help someone stranded in Europe because of a volcanic eruption that shuts down international air traffic by not making a profit? If someone dies from radiation poisoning in Fukushima, Japan, and you decide not to short the Nikkei and not make a profit, how does that help anybody? Think in realistic terms. Your buying and selling a stock does not add or detract from human suffering caused by Mother Nature. Someone may want to guilt you into that. You may try and guilt yourself into thinking that way. But the fact of the matter is, your action has no consequences. In fact, I could argue that if you made a profit by being wiser than other people, by acting ahead of the trend or getting on the trend early, that you could take a portion of your earnings and donate it to a charity to help the victims in Haiti or to help the victims in Japan. But you're not going to help anybody if you're broke and poor. Like all things in wealth building, we don't think of scarcity. We think of prosperity, and we think about controlling and affecting the things that are within our circle of influence. Keep that in mind and never feel guilty about making a profit if you do it in a legitimate and legal manner. So I won't belabor the point, but you can think of all the ways that Mother Nature affects the markets. Droughts that cause crops to die, that would cause vegetable or beef prices to raise. Just think of those events. Try and put yourself in that situation. Think strategically up and down the supply chain. If there's a drought in California and it causes beef cattle or dairy herds to suffer, or produce like tomatoes or lettuce or cucumbers, or even tree crops like almonds, if it causes a disruption in that supply chain, who's going to be affected by it? Whose profits are going to be hurt? Will it be the grocers? Will it be the wholesalers? Will it be the growers? How can you profit from it? If almond prices skyrocket, does that mean that consumers will not pay the added price and thus substitute to a product like peanuts or walnuts? Who produces those? Should you buy their stock? Will the input costs to restaurants, will it be too high and cause consumers to stop eating there? If beef prices skyrocket, who will be affected more? Taco Bell, Wendy's, Ruth's Chris? These are all things to consider. This is not greed. This is not heartlessness. This is being wise and strategic. Remember, if you're broke and poor, you can't help anyone. Okay, so you understand how those Mother Nature events work. You can see the same thing happen with government. Governments create war. Governments create inflation. Governments may overregulate. They may be corrupt. Governments can create monopolies which distort the market. Governments can put in barriers to trade, tariffs, taxes. Again, you get the picture. Not only U.S. government, but all governments, they become so large and so pervasive that whenever they enact policies, they can have drastic effects on individual companies and broad segments of the market. Now again, in this podcast, we're not going to delve into details. It's just to give you an understanding and get you thinking in that direction. When you hear of a government policy, the first thing you should think about is who's going to make a profit and who's going to take a loss from that governmental policy decision. And then you should evaluate on a personal level and understand, is there a way for you to make a profit on it? Now, on the human nature side of things, it's not as black and white. It's not as necessarily event-driven as the acts of Mother Nature and the acts of government. Again, it's much more nuanced. But you should be a student of human nature. Remember we talked in previous episodes about being able to identify value, and in regards to people, that meant being able to judge their character? Well, we know that humans are not angels. We all have fatal flaws. We all have a dark side. Humans can act very callously. Humans can hate. They can lie. They can carry out acts of fraud, deceit. They can be envious, extortion, addiction. It goes on and on. Did I mention murder? These are all the dark side of humanity. On the other hand, there are great sides of humanity. Love, kindness, charity. All humans everywhere exhibit these characteristics of human nature, both good and bad. As an investor, you should always be conscious and know that there's a chance that you're dealing with either a Dr. Jekyll or a Mr. Hyde. When Ronald Reagan was negotiating with the Soviet Union, he was famous for the quote, "Trust but verify." Now I'm much more of a cynic than Ronald Reagan. My advice would be, always be skeptical and verify. So anytime you're dealing with humans or human nature, be skeptical. Be conscious of the fact that there could be a dark side to the transaction. The CEO of the company that you want to invest in, he could be a crook. He could be a fraud. He could be cooking the books. Scams are perpetrated against investors every day. There are the large billion-dollar thefts like the Bernie Madoffs and the Enrons, and then there's the little penny thefts that never get reported. Don't let yourself be deceived. Don't be naive thinking it won't happen to you. Be skeptical and verify. And that goes for me too. Don't take the things that I say for gospel. Verify and fact check things that you hear me or anybody else tell you. Something else is relevant for us to discuss when we talk about human nature, and that's man's ability to either be rational or irrational. Now I believe there's a part of all humans, it's ingrained in our human nature, it's in our DNA, that we have faith in things. If you're a religious person, you have faith in God. If you're not a religious person, if you're an atheist, I still think there's a void there, and it has to be filled with something. So you end up putting your faith in something else. I'm not saying faith is a bad thing. On a personal level, it's critical in my life. And I believe when you look at things like acts of kindness, things that people like Mother Teresa, she couldn't have done the things that she did, the good works that she did, without faith. Throughout the history of mankind, there have been people that were motivated by either their religious faith or some other type of conviction, and they could have never achieved or accomplished the task at hand if they were rational about things. They had a faith in a greater power other than themselves, and that's what gave them the courage and the stamina to go on to victory or to accomplish their task. So I'm not saying faith is a bad part of human nature. I think it could be very good and very positive. But if faith is placed in untruth or inaccurate data, whether it's religious or scientific, it doesn't matter what it is. If you have faith in something that's not true, it obviously can be catastrophic. And again, this can be faith in anything. Faith in a religion, faith in science, faith in government. And we do see this all the time with governments. People get so involved in their theories that just like a religious zealot, they don't look at the truth. They delude themselves into thinking they're being rational. Let's look at Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve. Back during the housing crisis, he said that he was shocked He was shocked that the Federal Reserve's economic models didn't detect that there was a housing bubble. Now, obviously, with a comment like that, Greenspan lived in an ivory tower. He was detached from reality, because had he lived in my neighborhood, he would have foreseen the massive amount of foreclosures. He would have seen the people that moved into houses that didn't have an income to pay the mortgage. He would have seen the subprime loans that people were taking, the second and third mortgages because they couldn't come up with the down payment, the T's or low interest rates that were inevitably going to rise. And when they did, there was no way these people were going to make their monthly payments. Now, for some reason, Alan Greenspan, the Federal Reserve, and their sophisticated models and algorithms couldn't detect that. But again, people like you and I, we were able to see it because we could see it happening all around us. So that's an example of putting your faith in something that's irrational, and people do it all the time. Again, be skeptical and verify. Something that's important to remember about human nature, and this is not only when you're investing in a company and you're concerned about the management or the intentions of the government or the reliability of an auditor or a rating agency, or to bring it down to even a more personal level when you're dealing with people in your everyday life and you're assessing their character. Again, remember that all humans have flaws and that we know that power corrupts. That's why the founders of our government put in checks and balances to try and prevent the government from getting too large, from getting too efficient. So in your interpersonal relationships, or as you look at companies to invest in, try to understand what checks and balances are in place, or what checks and balances you can put in place to prevent yourself from being defrauded or taken advantage of or cheated in some way. And looking at this dark side of mankind, again, think about ways that you might be able to profit from it. Not in a way that you'd be corrupt or evil, but how is the market going to react to the bad side of mankind? Well, there's going to be police forces, there's going to be law enforcement, there's going to be software to detect cyber crimes, there's going to be authentication protocols, all types of checks and balances. What types of companies provide those services? How can you profit from it? Now, on a positive note, the great thing about humanity, the wonderful thing about mankind, is his ability to cooperate, to form unions and federations with other people, and to create systems where everybody can prosper. That's the foundation of the free market. That's the foundation of how ultimately we all make profit. So when you think of human nature, look for those symbiotic relationships. Look for companies or industries or governments that are able to work together, that are able to get synergy, that are able to break down barriers and create opportunity. Now, this episode about being able to profit from nature, like we talked about in profiting from trends, it's all about having a situational awareness, being aware of your surroundings, being aware of what's happening, looking for ways that you can profit or not suffer a loss because of events that are going to occur anyway. Natural disasters, actions of government, good or evil intentions of people, they're all going to occur whether you like it or not. So look for opportunities for you to profit from them. Plan for the inevitable disasters to happen from Mother Nature. They always do. There will always be another hurricane. There will always be another tornado. There will always be a flood. Be aware of these things. Try to mitigate your exposure. And again, find ways that maybe you can profit from it. When it comes to human nature, don't be naive. Realize that mankind has good and bad tendencies. Try and live and organize your life so that you can be surrounded by as many good people as possible and insulate yourself from the evil. On that note, we'll wrap up this episode on Wealth Building Principle number 7, Profit from Nature, and I invite you to join me again on our next episode where we'll continue our 10-part series and we'll discuss one of my favorite topics, how to decrypt propaganda. So join me for the next episode where we discuss how to read between the lines and not take things at face value. If you have comments about the podcast or you have questions that you'd like to hear answered on upcoming episodes, please contact me at our website at wealthsteading.com. Wishing you the very best of returns. This is John Pugliano. See you on the next episode. Welcome to the Wealthsteading Podcast. I'm your host, John Pugliano. I'm the founder and money manager at investablewealth.com. This podcast is dedicated to helping investors attain personal freedom and liberty by helping them build, preserve, and grow their wealth. Today we continue our 10-part series, which is a discussion around the wealth building principles. We'll be discussing the 8th wealth building principle, which is decrypt propaganda. Being able to decrypt propaganda is a valuable wealth building skill, and not unsimilar to the wealth building principle number 4, which is identifying value. Decrypting propaganda is all about getting to the truth in information, reading between the lines, and understanding what's really happening, not what people want you to believe, or what people are trying to shape your opinion. As investors that are concerned about building and preserving our wealth, we always talk about thinking rationally, thinking in black and white, using our situational awareness. That's why identifying value is so important. And likewise, Why being able to see through the BS and minutia is important. Getting down to the truth. You can't use rational thought if you're basing that analysis on a false storyline or on misinformation. And I believe that virtually everything that you read or everything that's targeted at you is misinformation or disinformation. It's not a conspiracy. It's just that everyone is trying to sell you something. As we've talked about in previous episodes, it's just a matter of being mature and not being naive. That's how you're able to build wealth. And a key element of being mature is not accepting things at face value. Understanding that there's a story behind the story. Knowing that people are trying to sell you things. And as such, they're going to try and manipulate you, shape your opinion, manipulate your thoughts, prey on your emotions. Again, it's not a tinfoil hat conspiracy. I think a conspiracy implies that it's a small group of people behind a plot. This isn't a small group of people. It's the entire world. Everybody's trying to sell you something. Everybody's trying to message something to you. The car salesman, the real estate agent, the surgeon, the plumber, your kids, your parents, your spouse, your teacher, your boss, your employees. You get it, right? Everybody wants something from you. When I was a teenage kid, I had many jobs, and one of them was working in a niche specialty retailing shop. It was kind of like an outdoors camping army surplus store. The old man that ran the place was extremely shrewd, a fantastic businessman. I was a kid, so he seemed really old to me. I'm not really sure how old he was, but I do have to believe he had to be close to his 80s, something like that. Came to work every day, wore a little fedora, drove a big Cadillac. He was an amazing old man. I remember every now and then he'd drop a little nugget of wisdom. Now, I wasn't that bright of a kid, but I knew this old man had pulled himself up from the bootstraps. He'd created his own wealth. So I did try and pay attention to things he said. I did think there was a lesson that he could teach me. I remember once he tapped me on the shoulder, or maybe shoved me. He was kind of a gruff old guy. And he said, "Listen, kid, I'm going to tell you the secret to life. Everyone is trying to get into your pocket. Open up your wallet and take your money out and put it into their pocket. You get it, kid? Everybody's trying to sell you something." Well, truer words are probably never spoken. To this day, I think that was a valuable lesson that he taught me. It's taught me to be careful, to be cautious, to be skeptical and cynical. I know that when the salesman's trying to build a relationship with me, he doesn't care about me. He doesn't like me. He doesn't want to be my friend. He just wants me to buy something from him. It doesn't matter if it's insurance or a car, a new smartphone, whatever it is. He's trying to sell me some kind of product or service. Again, it's not a conspiracy. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't necessarily even have to do with the free market or capitalism. Go to a communist country. They'll try and do the same thing. Go to a country where everything's controlled by the state. They put the hard sale on you. And that's why I entitled this episode, Decrypt Propaganda. Because it is propaganda. It's propaganda just like a fascist or a communist or any totalitarian regime would use. Whether it's marketing from Madison Avenue or whether it's some con job from the government, it's all propaganda. Don't believe me? Well, let's think about it. Let's break down that word. By definition, propaganda is some kind of message or information that's biased or misleading in some way. It's used to promote or publicize a particular point of view or a political cause. Again, it doesn't matter whether it's a salesman trying to sell you a product or service or whether it's the government trying to shape your opinion and make you rationalize why you should vote for them or why you shouldn't care that they're taking away your personal freedoms or taxing your wealth. It's all propaganda. Now, I know the origin of the word's Latin, and I think the original meaning had something to do with promoting the faith of the Pope. My Latin and my Italian, for that matter, isn't very good. But the funny thing is, when I break that word down, it reminds me of my old Italian grandfather. I can hear my old grandfather saying that in his broken English. It's a pro-agenda, right? It's someone's agenda. Whenever you think of that word, whenever you think of propaganda, think of somebody promoting their agenda. I can remember my grandfather screaming propaganda at the TV. Now, if you remember from past episodes when I've talked about him, he only had a third-grade education, but the man was smart. The man had wisdom. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, I can remember that old man yelling at the TV in his broken English. He'd be watching the evening news with Walter Cronkite. Now, if you're nostalgic and you remember back to Walter Cronkite, or if you Google his name, you'll probably see quotes like, "He's the most trusted man in America. He's America's anchor man." Those were the days when everybody believed network news and everybody believed Walter Cronkite. Every reporter aspired to be Walter Cronkite because of the trust and confidence the American people had in him and in his reporting. Well, not my grandfather, the guy with the third-grade education. He saw through Walter Cronkite. He knew Cronkite had a biased opinion. Literally, I can remember my grandfather shouting at the TV. He'd use some choice words and say something about, "That a guy, he a liar. Why the American people believe us such a BS? What's the matter for you?" I used to egg him on because I thought it was hilarious. But my grandfather had seen a lot of totalitarian regimes. He had seen a lot of governments come up and suppress people's freedom. He managed to survive near starvation conditions of a World War I German POW camp. The man was no dummy. He knew propaganda when he saw it. As investors, we need to be that shrewd. As people that are concerned about our liberty and our freedom and about building our wealth, whether it's a salesman that's trying to sell us some gimmick or whether it's a bureaucrat trying to promote some scheme, we need to be able to see through it. So how do they do it? How do they promote this propaganda? How do they twist the facts? Well, it's because they try and control the language. They try and control the discussion. They think by shaping the discussion, they can shape your thoughts. If they can get you to think in a particular way that smoking this cigarette makes you cool, drinking this type of soda makes you hip, driving this particular car or wearing this brand of clothing makes you look like a real man or a real woman, makes you look macho or sexy, that's how they do it. That's how they shape your actions. They first manipulate the language, they shape your thoughts, and then they control your actions. I think it was an old Clint Eastwood movie, maybe The Outlaw Josie Wales, where somebody has a great quote. They say something like, "Don't pee down my back and tell me it's raining." That's exactly what the propagandists are doing. They're literally peeing on you and then telling you it's raining. How do you think Madison Avenue's advertising gets you to buy just some commodity generic soap and spend 3 times as much on it, or some other worthless consumer product? Think about the way things are marketed. Vodka, for example. Now, I'm no expert on alcohol, but it's my understanding that one of the key features of vodka is that it doesn't smell like anything or it doesn't taste like anything. It's a high-proof alcohol, but it really has no distinctive flavors. It's not like a brandy. It's not like a bourbon. It's not like a whiskey. So if you have this alcoholic drink and it really has no taste, no flavor, no smell, how can you have such a proliferation in different brands of vodka, all claiming to be the best, all claiming to be superior? Some bottles selling for $50, others selling for $7. It's crazy. I understand that in Russian, vodka means little water. And so speaking of water in a bottle, think about it. Think about bottled water. That's something else that's been branded like crazy for probably about the last 20 years. It's fresh, it's refreshing, it's water. It doesn't taste like anything. And I think the funniest thing is when they put it in a fancy bottle, like a square bottle, and they give it some cool name, have you think it's coming from the island somewhere. They call it Fiji water, something like that. Get you to pay $4 for it. It's no different than what comes out of your tap. That's marketing. It's great marketing, but it's all still propaganda. For the most part, as long as they're not using fraud, I really don't mind when salesmen or companies are trying to propagandize and tell us why their product is best. I mean, come on, they're trying to make a buck, they're trying to sell us something, they're trying to differentiate the product. I can understand that. See, the thing is, for the most part, unless they're a monopoly, they really aren't putting a gun to our head and forcing us to buy their product. Now, that's arguable if you talk about the cable companies or somebody, again, like that has a monopoly. But remember, these monopolies, they're only created with the sanctions of government. So in my mind, these big greedy corporations, or these unscrupulous businesses, or these monopolies, they only get away with what they get away with because the government allows it. And the government allows it, in my mind, because the government's the biggest propagandist of them all. And I'm using just government generically. U.S. government, French government, Chinese government, they all have propaganda. They're all trying to justify why they're taking your money and why they're taking your freedom and why you shouldn't care. Why you should be a good little drone and be a good little citizen or a good little subject. Go on about your business and not cause any trouble. Now, governments, whether they're totalitarian or whether they're democracies, whatever you want to call them, they all operate under the same principle. They gain their power and authority by transferring wealth or transferring money from the producers to them. Those people in the government then take that money, they convert it into power, and they redistribute it. Most of it goes out to their friends that help keep them in power. A little bit of it trickles down to individuals to keep the peasants from rioting in the streets. It's the same whether it's a totalitarian regime or whether it's a democratic society. It works on the basis of concentrated benefit versus diffused penalty. Let's say you're a special interest group in America. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be a union within the government. You could be a non-governmental organization. You could be a big corporation. You could be a consortium of small-town chamber of commerces. You could be a group of activist women that want birth control. Or you could be a religious group that wants to impose your views on somebody else. It doesn't matter what it is. It's all the same. You have this special interest group. They go to the government because they want some special legislation that favors them, that favors their idea, that favors their opinion, that favors them making a profit. It doesn't matter what it is. Again, it all depends on what type of group it is, but the bottom line is they either want power or they want money. Frequently those two are indistinguishable, so they generally want both. Now, the special interest group goes to the government and they lobby the government. Whether it's a local city council, whether it's the President of the United States, the Senate, whoever wherever their sphere of influence is. They go and they try and exert pressure on the government. And then they create some kind of an ad campaign or some kind of opinion-shaping campaign or some kind of a polling process where they try and get the general public to either support their idea or their opinion or to hide it, to subjugate it, to make it like a stealth thing so people don't even know that it's going on. They either want to get you on their side or they don't want you to know about it. And the leaders in the government, they only care about getting reelected. You know that. So they will create some kind of a feigned response to this special interest group. Oh, I can't do that because my constituencies are against it, or I can't do that because these people are opposed to it, or I can't do that because I'm running for re-election and people will vote against it if I do that. That's unpopular. They either make up this fake resistance or create this dichotomy so that the special interest group feels that they need these government officials to ram it through. Right? If it was easy and it could just be done, they wouldn't have to charge a large fee for it. So it would impede these bureaucrats, these government people, from getting their cut of the money and the power. So the special interest groups somehow collude with the government, find a way to pay off the government, and the people, the general population, they ultimately don't care about it. Because remember what I said at the beginning of this, it's concentrated benefit versus diffused penalty. You have a small group, and again, it doesn't matter what it is. A left group, a right group, a Republican, a Democrat, a religious group, a business group, someone supposedly fighting for rights. It doesn't matter what it is, whatever that group is. They're going after a benefit. They're going after the government. And they want the government to either directly redistribute and funnel tax dollars to them, or they want the government to impose some kind of restrictions on the general population, which again shifts that power over to the special interest group. As I said, it could be a direct payment of money. The special interest group wants $250 million for something, right? To study global warming, to study some cause, or to help the children, right? You've heard all that before, to save the world. Who knows what crazy thing it is? Generally, they don't care about the topic. They just want the $250 million. You have this small concentrated group trying to get this $250 million from the government. Could be a direct transfer. The government just reaches in to tax dollars and writes this organization a check. Now, there's over 300 million people in the U.S., there's probably only about 100 million households that pay taxes. So for this small group to get $250 million, which is a lot of money because it's pure profit, right? It's pure extortion money. The only thing they had to do to get that money was influence or extort it out of the government somehow. They didn't have to build a factory. They didn't have to produce a product or a service. So it goes straight to their bottom line. $250 million to the bottom line goes a long way. But in terms of those American taxpayers, those 100 million households, what is it to them? $2.50? Are you going to go protest your state capitol because someone took $2.50 away from you? Are you going to go do a million-man march on Washington, D.C., on the White House or on the Congress because someone took $2.50 away from you? Of course you're not. That's the diffused penalty. You don't even miss it. You don't even notice it. But this small special interest group, $250 million is a lot to them. So they'll do everything they can to get it, and you'll never notice it's gone. And it may not even be a direct transfer payment like that. It just may be a regulation. The government requires the masses to do something. You have to get a safety inspection on your car. You have to have a certain type of coverage in your medical insurance. Maybe you have to have a particular license, or maybe you can't get into an occupation or study a particular education field, which keeps you out, keeps the competition low. You know, the old money, the status quo. That's what it's all about. It's about preserving and protecting their power and their money and their financial base. That's how propaganda works. When someone tells you they're doing it for the children, and then you fill in the blank whatever it is, whether it's spending more in education, or saving the polar bears, or putting more cops in the street, or outlawing this illegal drug, whatever it is, it's not about that. It's about the money and it's about the power. And they always get away with it because the special interest group gets the concentrated benefit, the mass of people don't notice the penalty, and the middleman government politicians and bureaucrats and regulators, they make their money on the transactions on either side of it. So how do you identify this? Well, I suggest you look for what I call the Potemkin Village. Potemkin Village was a show place. I believe its origins in history go back to the 1500s, but in more modern times it was used to describe propaganda in the Soviet Union. The Soviets would have these Potemkin villages, these show places. They'd bring Westerners over to them. They'd bring in these intellectuals and these politicians from the Western countries or capitalist societies. These people became useful idiots for the communists. They'd go and see what a worker's paradise this place was, how there were no poor, how it was utopia, how everybody lived in this cooperative society. And then they'd take that communist propaganda back to the Western countries. So a Potemkin village is a show place. The Potemkin villages are built to fool you, the facade. How do you see through this? How do you decrypt the propaganda? Well, you can find your way through all this misinformation the same way you would if you were lost by using navigation techniques. Think of triangulation, what you do with a compass and a map. If you have a map and a compass and you don't know where you're at, you look out into the horizon, you look out into the landscape, and you see at least two identifiable points, say a mountaintop or a peak on one side and some other type of discernible structure. You find those on the map, and then you shoot an azimuth with a compass from where you're at to those 2 points that you've identified on a map. And then taking that reverse azimuth, you draw the lines on a map between those 2 points, and where they intersect, it forms the apex of a triangle. That's why they call it triangulation. You're using at least 2 known points, and you're drawing straight lines back from them to the origin. That origin of the triangle is where you're at. So now you're able to pinpoint your location on a map when you didn't know where you were at beforehand. You have to triangulate with the truth. So take 2 known sources, something on the left and something on the right. Say the Wall Street Journal on the right, or Fox News on the right, and the New York Times on the left. You know that neither one is telling the truth, but you know that there's some element of truth in either one of them. So you read these multiple opinions, these multiple articles. You try and identify who the special interest groups are and what message they're trying to manipulate, and then you triangulate back to the truth. And you know they're really telling a big lie when they all agree. When they all agree on something like the Patriot Act, where they all agree that we should be going into a war in Iraq. And some of you may be saying, oh, that was just George Bush, that was just the right. No, think back. All government, left and right, they all mobilized. They all wanted to go fight terrorism. They pushed through the Patriot Act, and they pushed through a war with Saddam Hussein. Later, the Democrats backtracked on the war in Iraq. But to this day, they still support the Patriot Act. Look who the Commander-in-Chief is today, Barack Obama. The Patriot Act implementation and spying on American citizens is worse under Obama than it was under Bush. Again, it has nothing to do with Democrat, Republican. It's big government. They all want power and control when they get in charge. So when you see both sides agreeing on something, you really need to worry. So evaluate your personal lifestyle. Evaluate how you filter the news for making investment choices or for making lifestyle choices. Are you being marketed to and sold by Madison Avenue to buy some consumer product that you don't need or don't want? Are you being manipulated by the big government to take away your wealth and your freedom? Learn to triangulate the news. Learn to see these Potemkin villages for what they are. Don't be a useful idiot for anybody. Learn to decrypt the propaganda so that you can make wise and reasoned decisions based on the truth. That's how you're going to build your wealth. That's how you're going to attain your own personal freedom and liberty. Be skeptical, be cynical. Don't trust anyone. Again, don't trust me. Fact check what I tell you. See if it rings true. Think with your head, not with your heart. And with that, I'll close out this discussion on the 8th wealth building principle. And I invite you back to hear our next episode, which is wealth building principle number 9, be a giver. As always, we encourage your questions and comments. If you have a question that you'd like to hear answered on a future episode, or if you have a comment about this episode or any of the other shows we've done, please get in contact with me through wealthsteading.com. I appreciate you listening, and I enjoy being your host. This is John Pugliano, and I wish you the best of returns. Welcome back to the Wealthsteading Podcast. I'm your host, John Pugliano. I'm the founder and money manager at investablewealth.com. Here at the Wealthsteading Podcast, we're all about helping you attain personal freedom. Now, wealthsteading is a spin-off of the old-fashioned homesteading. If you remember the pioneers that take over a small piece of property, maybe a few acres, and they'd try and sustain their family off of the crops and the animals that they could produce on that land. Well, today in the 21st century, we attain personal freedom and liberty by wealthsteading. That's where we build, preserve, and grow our wealth. Remember, wealth is all about freedom. We're coming to the end of our 10-part series. Today's episode will cover the 9th wealth building principle, which is be a giver. Now, our world is made up of makers and takers, but to be truly financially independent and to have real happiness, you have to be a giver, someone that produces more than they consume. And that's in all aspects of your life, your business and income earning areas of your life, as well as your personal life. Now, it's just plain common sense that to become wealthy, you have to produce and save more than you consume. If you don't, you'll be broke. You'll be a slave to debt. You'll be running up credit card and consumer debt, and you'll spend all your life living paycheck to paycheck. So obviously, if you want financial capital, if you want financial wealth, you have to find a way to earn a substantial income and then be a diligent saver. Now, the same can be true when it comes to the character, the non-financial behavior that we experience. Now, this is more nuanced. It's harder to quantify than the financial side. To be truly happy, you have to build social capital in your personal life. Social capital is a source of healthy relationships. And as I say, it's hard to quantify, but you have to be a giver, not a taker, when it comes to your personal character and your personal relationships. And that's what builds happy marriages, happy homes. That's how people develop happy memberships in clubs or organizations. Social capital is every bit as important as monetary or financial capital. So in this podcast, we're going to discuss giving in terms of both financial or monetary capital. That would be you as an employee or you as an entrepreneur. And then also in terms of your social capital. That's your character. That's charitable, philanthropic giving. We're going to look at both of those. Let's start out on the career side. Now, as we've talked about in previous episodes, production is the source of wealth. Wealth doesn't come from a paycheck. It doesn't come from the government. It doesn't come by winning a lottery. Wealth only comes when you produce. And that's either as an entrepreneur that has your own company or as an employee that works for somebody else. You have to add value. You have to create products and services that customers want and that they're willing to spend money on. The customer is the ultimate boss. Now, I know many listeners to this podcast are employees, so let's focus on that side of it for a bit. As an employee, you have to give. You have to be a giver. You have to produce more than you're paid. Now remember, your compensation isn't just your paycheck. Your employer has many expenses besides what you just see in your take-home pay. He has to pay you. He has to pay payroll taxes. He has to pay your benefits. There's other fees involved like workman's compensation. He has to provide you with a workspace, maybe tools. He has to invest capital to create the business to employ you to begin with. So there's a lot more that goes into your compensation other than just that take-home pay that you receive. And you have to ensure that your employer is getting a return well above what he's paying you with all those extra costs. You have to produce a profit for him. It's not that he's greedy. It's not that he's mean or cruel or that he's trying to take advantage of you. Why would he possibly employ you if there wasn't some incentive for him? He's not going to do this out of the goodness of his heart, and neither would you. So if you want to have a successful career as an employee, determine what your true compensation is, and then make sure that you're always providing your employer with more than that. You have to be a giver. Now let's think about what that may mean. Let's look at a couple examples. Let's start at the lowest level. Let's look at the quintessential fast food worker, right? The burger flipper. We hear about how horrible and what low pay these jobs are, but let's just use that as our starting point. Maybe as a teenager or a young adult, you're employed as a fast food worker. Actually, in this economy with so many people being laid off, particularly those in middle age, they can't get back into the workforce. Working in a fast food restaurant may be their only avenue back to employment. So let's consider that for a moment. You start off as an employee in one of these places. They pay you minimum wage, not because they're cruel or greedy. They pay you minimum wage because that's all you're producing for the company. The skill level that you're providing, the service that you're providing in that restaurant is only providing the employer with a slim margin. So he can't afford to pay you more. In a minimum wage role, you're going to be starting out maybe working in the restaurant, cleaning up, going out, picking up trash, bringing food out to customers. But remember, you have to be a giver. You always have to be producing more. If you want to excel, you have to be producing at 1 or 2 or maybe 3 levels above where you're at. That's how you can ensure that you're going to stay employed and that you're going to have a successful and prosperous career, even when you're starting out at the bottom. So you start out in this restaurant, you're just the cleanup person. You show up on time, you show up clean, you're neat, you're respectful, you provide good customer service, and that gets you promoted maybe to working at the counter. Now you're a front-facing person. Again, you show that you're diligent, you provide great customer service, you're trustworthy, so you start handling money. You show up consistently to work, you're always on time, you're willing to work late, you're willing to work extra hours. You're showing your employer that you're a giver, you're not a taker. You'll eventually be able to work your way up to whatever the next level is, maybe a team leader where you start learning all the aspects of the restaurant, the operations in the kitchen as well as the front end of the restaurant. By doing these things, you're better than most employees there. You're better than most of the minimum wage or slightly better than minimum wage employees. There will be opportunities for you. Because you're a giver, because you're working always at a level 1 or 2 above where you're being paid, you're going to move up. You'll be promoted maybe to an assistant manager, then on to being a manager, a regional manager. You can keep working your way all the way up to be an owner. Don't tell me this doesn't happen. I know it happens. I know people that started out as burger flippers that today are either managers or owners of large operations and restaurants, and I'm not talking fancy restaurants, just regular fast food restaurants, and I promise you, I've seen what they make. They're making $150,000 to $200,000 a year. This didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen in 3 or 4 years. They put in their 10,000 hours. They worked at each of these levels, starting from the ground floor and working their way up, and now they're highly compensated. Yeah, they're in their 40s or 50s. They're building wealth for themselves and their family. They're building financial independence. They did this because they started out as a giver, and even today they're a giver. They're giving more to the customers that come in there and spend their money. They're providing those customers with the value that they want in the fast food restaurant. Otherwise, the customers wouldn't come there. They'd go someplace else. They'd go to a restaurant that was cleaner or had faster service or had better food. So they're providing customers with the experience that they want by giving them a higher level of value than what that customer's paying. The customer is happy to come in and make that exchange, to spend $1 or $2 on the value menu or to spend $5 or $6 or $10 or $15 or $20 for the entree meals. The customers see the value. I know you're saying, hey, that can't happen to everybody. There are going to be managers that just won't promote you. There are going to be owners that just don't want to pay you what you're worth. And you know what? You're absolutely right. And you know what? Those managers or those owners, they're not performing at or above their next level. They're seeing things at a very self-serving or scarcity mentality. They're not looking at ahead. And if you're an employee and you're working for somebody like that, you know what you do? You quit. You go out and you find a better job. I promise you, if you live in the United States and you're a hard worker and you're willing to work at 2 or 3 levels above where you're currently being paid, you'll always find a job. If you're able-bodied, you're healthy, you have a sound mind, and you're willing to produce, there's someone willing to hire you. And the reason is because, remember we talked about your compensation? If you're working at 1 or 2 or 3 levels above where they're paying you, they're getting a firm profit back. They're getting a nice margin. It's profitable to them and they will hire you. They just want to make money. They want to make a profit. If you can prove that you'll consistently work at that level and produce for them, they will hire you. It may take some time. You may have to prove yourself, right? There's no free lunch, but it will happen. I know too many people that are in their 40s and 50s and are successful today because they started out at the bottom 30, 40 years ago. Now let's still look at an employee example, but let's look at another one that's not so low level as a burger flipper. Let's look at somebody that has a degree. Maybe they went to college, they studied business, accounting, finance, something like that. Maybe they're working for a mid-sized company or a large corporation. They start out in the accounting department. This is the low end of the food chain for that type of profession. If all they do is do their job, work with some spreadsheets, count some numbers, go home every day, they're going to stay in that job for the rest of their life. They're never going to excel. The way they get ahead is, just like the burger flipper, they have to be thinking 1 or 2 or 3 levels above where they're at now. So they start out in the accounting department. Again, they show themselves reliable, trustworthy. They come in on time. They stay late. They work themselves into, say, the auditing department. They go above and beyond there. Then they get promoted and they can work as a business analyst where they can show that they're just not competent crunching the numbers, but they can also provide insight. They can show their creativity, that they can not only look at the numbers, but they can crunch them and analyze them and help their company make more money, help their company produce for the bottom line. That's what they do in the business analyst side of things. From there, they go on to support the sales team or the executive staff, again, helping with the bottom line, showing that they can not only crunch numbers, but they can apply those in real-world situations where they can keep making the company more and more money. Just like the employee in the fast food restaurant, they have to produce more than they're compensated. They have to produce a marginable profit for their employer, otherwise they wouldn't employ them. So they continue working their way up. Maybe they start working on mergers and acquisitions. Again, they show their talent, they show their ability to have a good business sense, their ability to be able to see the bottom line. They get promoted to be a general manager or vice president. Now again, this isn't going to happen overnight. You've got to put in your 10,000 hours. But someone can start out in the accounting department, and over 15, 20 years, they can work their way up. They can be a general manager. They can be a vice president. They can be making $200,000, $300,000. Again, don't tell me it doesn't happen. I've seen it. I've seen it happen over and over again. If you're willing to work, if you're willing to put in the hours, if you're willing to produce, if you can be the giver, you'll be compensated. And I understand you're saying, but hey, some employees, they'll block you. People will be jealous. They'll put roadblocks in your way where you can't get ahead, or your boss will feel threatened and he will do whatever he can to see that you don't get promoted. Well, all that's probably true, but you know what? When that happens, you have to go find another job. Now, if you're performing at a high level and you're working for a company that after 2 or 3 years they haven't promoted you, they haven't given you additional money, they haven't given you more incentive, they haven't provided you with more leadership opportunities or pathways to grow in the company, then you need to leave that company. Don't ever spend more than 2 or 3 years someplace where you're not growing. Get out and find someone that will promote you, someone that will pay you what you're worth. Don't ever be afraid to quit if it means you can better yourself somewhere else. Now, up till now, we've been talking about how things work for employees, but they're the same way for an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur is just an employee that's willing to accept more risk and responsibility and pay himself rather than working for someone. And the entrepreneur, just like everybody, he has a boss. His boss is the customer. If he doesn't satisfy the customer goes somewhere else. They fire him. So the customer is not only the entrepreneur's boss, but really it's everybody's boss. And that entrepreneur always has to be satisfying the customer at 1 or 2 or 3 levels above what they're paying him. You can't just go out and create a better mousetrap and think the world's going to be the path to your door. You need to prove your concepts. You need to prove your products. You need to market them. You need to solicit your customers. You need to let them know that the value that your products or services are providing to the customer are well and above the few dollars that they're paying for them. Don't expect it to be easy. You need to go out and explain those features and benefits to people. Customers may not understand it right away. You're going to have competitors that talk bad about you, that try and discourage customers from using your products. You have to go out and sell it. But again, I promise you, if you're a giver, if you're giving at 1 or 2 or 3 levels of value more than you're being paid, eventually customers will recognize that value and then they will beat that path to your door. Customers are always happy to part with their money if they think they're getting value in exchange for it. I frequently talk about Steve Jobs. Apple is a company that provides value, and I've always been happy to part with my money in order to get their products and services. Think about what Steve Jobs and Apple have done in the areas of computing, of telecommunications, of music, not only listening to music, but the distribution of it. Right now I'm communicating to you through a podcast. Most likely you downloaded that from the iTunes store. We couldn't be having this conversation right now if it wasn't for Steve Jobs and the company he created at Apple. So myself and millions of other people are happy to part with our hard-earned money to give it to Apple so that we can get those products and services. On the entrepreneurial level, Steve Jobs is a genius. If you know his history, you know he's someone that dropped out of college. He started out at a low level. He worked his way up to build Apple, then he got fired from Apple, and then he came back and resurrected the company. He is the quintessential entrepreneur, and he's a perfect example when we talk about building financial capital. But I want to talk on the other side of things. I want to talk about social capital now. You know, from what I've read about Steve Jobs, he was lacking in the social capital area. If the stories about him are true, he probably teeters on the sociopath scale of things. He could be a very mean and cruel person. And I'm not talking about in a competitive nature. You would expect that from him. If he wants to go head-to-head with the guys at Google or the guys at Microsoft, you know, if he wants to take on Bill Gates, that's one thing. That's at his level. But when you read about Steve Jobs' personal interactions, the way he treated people below him, employees, staff, restaurant workers, just common people, he treated them mean. He treated them like dirt in many cases. He went out of his way, not only just to be condescending and rude, but actually to be mean. Again, I only know what I read about him. Now, if these things are true, then my assessment of him would be that although he had substantial monetary wealth, he was bankrupt when it came to social capital. And for him to act that way, he must have been a very insecure individual. He must have been very, very unhappy. Like so many people, despite all of his success, all of his money and wealth, inside he must have been a very lonely and unhappy man. He lacked social capital. And that's what I want to talk about next. Let's talk about social capital. Because to be happy, to be truly wealthy and independent, you have to have social capital. You have to have good character. No man is an island. We live in communities, in neighborhoods, in families. We have to be a giver there as well. Just like an entrepreneur that offers products and services at a high value, we have to offer love and social interactions and charity and philanthropy at a high level. We have to be giving at 1 or 2 levels above what we're receiving. And these are in all the personal aspects of our lives, in our families, in our friendships, in our neighborhoods and communities. And we reach that highest level when we're actually interacting and giving to the strangers, to the people we don't even know. That's when we're giving at the 3rd and the 4th level. Now, when we give to build social capital, it may not just be money. Money's the easiest thing to measure, so maybe you give 10% of your income, maybe you give 5% of your income. But it's just as important to give the time. America is an amazing place. Look at all the clubs and groups and organizations that just run on volunteering. It's all done by volunteers, people that contribute their time and their resources and their talents to help others. Again, to help people in their community, to help their friends. In many cases, just to help strangers, people they don't even know. These are at all levels. These could be food banks or some type of community groups. This could be helping out with the Boy Scouts. It might be helping at an animal shelter. Americans are wonderful people. They're very generous. Look at our clubs and our organizations and our churches and you'll see that. And it's all done by people of high character that are very philanthropic and they're willing to give of their time and of their money and their resources. And they do it just to be a giver because they're giving more than they're receiving. They're makers, they're not takers. When you see a great mom or a great dad, they're a giver. When you see a great family member, a child that honors their parents, maybe an aunt or an uncle that is especially nice to their nieces or nephews, those people are givers. When you see a friend or a neighbor that goes out of their way to help someone in the community, those people are givers. As I said before, giving on a social scale is hard to quantify. You can't add up the dollars and cents like you can with monetary capital. But it's just as real and probably even more important. You have to build your social capital if you want to be financially independent, if you want to be happy, if you want to be truly wealthy and independent. Social capital is real, and you can see it in people. You can see it in the wake these people make as they go through life, the happiness and the blessings and the goodness that came as a result of their giving. I've been blessed in my life to have wonderful people around me that have always been givers. I can name many of them, but for right now, I'll just think of my maternal grandfather. He was one of the nicest men I ever knew. Let me say that. He was the nicest man I ever knew. He was kind. He was friendly. He knew everybody in his community. He lived in a small coal mining community. As a child, I spent a lot of time with him. People used to call me his shadow. Wherever he went, I was always right behind him, just like a shadow. And I can remember, no matter where we went through the community, everybody knew him. Everybody said hi to him. Everybody waved to him. Everybody stopped to talk to him. And he gave his time freely to everyone. Whether it was someone of high social status or not, he talked to everybody. He enjoyed everyone's company. He participated in all the local organizations and tried to help and support his community. He worked with the veterans, although he never served. He was a big supporter of veterans organizations and always tried to help disabled veterans. He was there to help the poor. He wasn't a church-going man. He wasn't what you'd call a religious man, but he was very righteous. He had a big heart, and he liked to give. My grandfather was always giving. I remember one year, I don't remember if it was for Christmas or a boy's birthday, but I remember him going to the store and picking out and buying a bicycle for a little boy that came from a disadvantaged family. My grandfather was happy to take the time out of his day to go to the store, to pick that bike out, to put it into his car, to deliver it to that boy. My grandfather did that because he was a giver, and because of that he led a happy and a fulfilled life. And you can do the same thing. If you want to be happy and have a healthy lifestyle, you need to be a giver. You need to be a giver as an entrepreneur or as an employee, and you need to be a giver in your social life. You need to build both monetary capital as well as social capital. Remember, to build wealth in all aspects of your life, you always need to give more than you consume. You need to be a producer. You need to be a maker, not a taker. Whether you want to be a great spouse or a great parent or a great friend or neighbor, it's all about giving. I believe that your ultimate happiness, your true wealth, is more dependent on your social capital than on your monetary capital. But I also believe that by building your social capital, it'll make you more prosperous. You'll find more monetary opportunities come to you. So by building one, you'll actually be building both. You'll receive both social and monetary capital. If you truly want to have wealth, then you have to be a giver, and that's why giving is a part of our 10 wealth building principles. Well, we've come to the end of another episode. With the next episode, we'll finish our 10-part series. We'll talk about wealth as part of a lifestyle. I appreciate you listening. And as always, if you have comments to help the podcast, or if you have questions that you'd like to hear answered on another episode, you can contact me at wealthsteading.com. I wish you the best of returns. This is John Pugliano. Welcome to the Wealthsteading Podcast. I'm John Pugliano, the founder and money manager at investablewealth.com. In this episode, we'll be concluding our series on the wealth building principles. Today we'll be discussing the 10th principle, which is wealth is a lifestyle. Now, the reason I chose that phrase is because wealth isn't one singular event. We're going to be talking about that. We could use other cliches or metaphors. Wealth is a journey. It's a sprint, not a marathon. Think of it in whatever terms you'd like, but I like the phrase wealth is a lifestyle. So wealth is a lifestyle because it's not one-dimensional. There's no one element that's going to make you truly wealthy. And that's wealth in terms that we define it. Financial independence, freedom, happiness. It's not just the money. And what I mean that it's not one-dimensional, there's no one element, is that just because you're proficient in one area is not necessarily going to make you wealthy. For example, it's not about the size of your bank account. Just because you have $1 million in the bank does not make you wealthy. Consider someone that wins a lottery. You know what happens to someone that wins a lottery. In about a year or two, they're broke. They might have won the $30 million Powerball, but it's all gone. It's evaporated. They didn't understand the wealth building principles. They may have had a large pool of money, but they weren't frugal. They didn't know how to spend it. They didn't know how to wisely invest it. You've seen the same thing happen to people that inherit a large trust fund or maybe a business. Their father or grandfather started a business, leaves them a lot of money or leaves them the business. What happens? Generally, they're broke. You can see that in multi-generational businesses. Many of them never make it past the third generation. The grandchild didn't have the diligence, the fortitude, the gumption that the grandfather had. And so they squander the wealth. Now, another area that's critical to wealth building, but can't be relied on solely for it, is your earnings power. Let's look at one extreme example. Look at entertainers, movie stars, major league athletes. These people are making millions, maybe tens of millions of dollars a year. And then particularly like with major league athletes, within about 5 years of them retiring, you find out they're broke. Same thing with movie stars. A few years after they're in a hit movie or they haven't had a hit song come out, they're broke. It didn't matter how much they earned. Again, they didn't understand the other principles of wealth building. They weren't frugal. They didn't choose their friends wisely. In just a few years, they blew all their money. And you don't have to take it to the extremes of movie stars and athletes. The same thing happens with just regular high-income earners. Doctors, corporate executives, many of them simply live paycheck to paycheck. At the end of the month, they're literally broke just like Six-Pack Joe. It's because they consume more than they produce. It doesn't matter how much you're making. You could be making $100,000 a month. You're still going to be broke if you're spending $150,000 a month. These people haven't matured. They haven't learned to bridle their passions and cut down on their consumerism. Yes, they're high earners, but they're astronomical spenders. Well, another area that's obviously important to wealth building is savings. But just because you're a great saver doesn't make you wealthy. If you're a great saver, but you're only making minimum wage, it's unlikely you're going to be a millionaire. So it's just not about savings or being frugal. I look at wealth as being holistic. You're wealthy not because you want the money, but because you want the freedom and the independence that come with it. You want that true happiness. But even happiness doesn't assure that you're going to be wealthy. I've traveled around the world many times when I was in the military and in my business life. I've gone to many developing and emerging markets. I've met many people that were very truly happy. But you know what? They were dirt poor. So happiness doesn't make you wealthy. So that's why I say wealth is a lifestyle, because it encompasses all areas of your life. It's a part of your very being. Remember the first wealth building principle. Wealth is freedom, right? It's not just about the money. It's about using that money in a wise way to make yourself free and independent, to be able to help others. You have to be living your life in a balanced manner to have that holistic experience. You've got to be firing on all cylinders, not just one. You can't just focus on any one area. It's a lifestyle. You just can't set it and forget it. It's something you have to do every day in and day out. It's part of the grind, but it's very fulfilling. And that's why ultimately wealth does bring you happiness and freedom, because of that balance in your life. Let me step back a minute and go to a sidebar subject. See, there has to be balance in the economy as well to have a wealthy economy. To be a flourishing and growing economy, you have to have balance. You've either seen or heard about old ghost towns where the economy just evaporated, or parts of the U.S. that we call the Rust Belt that used to be based on mining and manufacturing economies, and then that went away. A town that disappeared because the natural resource is no longer there. All the ore or lead was taken up from the ground, and there's nothing left, and so there's no more economy. So you have to have balance. So in these macro terms, let's think about the birth rate. Let's think about fertility. If a society or country is having too many children, they can't prosper. There's scarcity. They can't feed and educate their population. There's not enough jobs to employ all the children that are being born. So if you look back in past history, you'll see, countries like India really struggled because they had just a population explosion, and their economy couldn't sustain all the people. They were out of balance. But the same can be said for the other end of the spectrum. If you're not having enough children, if the fertility rate's too low, if the population isn't growing, then you can't have a growing, prosperous economy. If no one's there to consume your products, if you have no consumers, then you can't have a consumer society. No one's going to buy your products. So there has to be balance. It has to be a holistic approach. That's one of the conundrums that I think our global economy is in right now. I believe that at least a part of the reason that the world is having a stagnant economy is because of low population growth. It was just 10 years ago that emerging economies were growing at double digits. Well, now even fast-growing places like China are only growing at 7%. And in the developed economies like Europe or Japan, they're not growing at all. They're constantly fighting deflationary pressures and stagnation. In the U.S., we're kind of staggering along. We do have real growth. But the U.S. GDP growth for the last 10 years has only been, I think, around 1.7%. And since the recession of 2008, if you take the average growth, we've struggled to hit a 2% GDP growth rate. So a lot of that macro problem might have to do with birth rates. If you think of female fertility rates, they talk about a replacement rate. Now it's different whether you're in, a wealthy, mature economy or whether you're an emerging, developing economy. And you see that's based on child mortality rates. Obviously, a child born in a middle-class family in Kansas is subject to a much lower mortality rate than a child born in the sub-Saharan Africa. So in developed nations, we usually say that a fertility rate of like 2.1 is a replacement rate. That replacement rate is what you need to keep the society at even, right? It's not growing, it's not declining. You need to have a birth rate of 2.1 for every woman just to maintain where you're at. Now, in these more emerging nations where they have higher infant mortality, that replacement rate may be more like 3 or 4. So if we look at the U.S. fertility rate, it's only 1.9. We're below that 2.1 replacement rate. And much of that 1.9 fertility rate is being driven by immigration birth rates. So it's not natural-born Americans that are having children. Britain and France are two of the more wealthy nations that are right at the replacement rate. Britain's at about 2.0, and I think France is right around 2.1, 2.2. Even in China, where they have 1.5 billion people, and where a lot assume that there's just a huge population, it's not growing. And that's why I always say that China is going to become old before they become rich. The Chinese fertility rate is only 1.6. They've been in decline for quite some time. Their era of being the factory of the world simply because they have a large, hungry population that was willing to work for slave wages, that's coming to an end. In fact, the only continent in the world that has a rising population is Africa. Much of that is sub-Saharan Africa. So if you don't have a growing population, it's very difficult to have a growing economy, right? It's the other end of the spectrum. If you have too many people, if you have too many mouths to feed, then you'll have a poor economy. But in the other end, if you don't have any people coming in to replace those that are there, you also are going to have a stagnant economy. The global birth rate is only something like 2%. So how can a 2% birth rate sustain a 7 or 8 or a 9% GDP rate? It just can't. And again, so this is just a macro example of how you have to have a holistic approach to wealth. If your system is out of balance on either end of the extreme, you're going to have problems. So let's get back down to you as an individual. How do you lead a wealthy lifestyle? Well, you have to focus on the other 9 wealth-building principles that we've discussed. And you have to start now. You have to start today. If you want to be wealthy, you have to start acting wealthy. And I don't mean acting like the Hollywood image of someone that's rich or wealthy. I'm talking about the true facts of the millionaire next door. Someone that lives a moderate lifestyle. They're not flashy. They work hard to build a good income, and then they save it and they learn to invest it. So if you start doing the things they do, you'll be like them. You'll have that wealth and you'll have that lifestyle. And don't think it won't work for you. It's a universal principle, right? If you do what fat people do, if you eat like fat people, you get fat. If you do what athletes do, you get a toned body. If you train like a marathon runner, you're going to look like a marathon runner. It's undeniable. And the same thing is true with our wealth building principles. If you live by those principles, you'll become wealthy. You'll become financially independent. So again, let's look at these areas of our life. We have to have an income stream. You have to have money coming in. Whether you're an employee or you're an entrepreneur, you have to find a way to get a solid income where you're paid for your abilities and your talents. You have to be smarter than the average bear. You not only have to maintain that income, but it's got to grow every year. You have to more than keep up with inflation. Each year you're getting wiser. You're older. You're more mature, right? You're that much better of an employee, or you're that much better of an entrepreneur. So you should be making more money. It's important that you find a way to keep your income rising. And then parallel with that, you have to be a disciplined saver. You have to lead that frugal life. Don't go out and buy or consume things just because you want to impress somebody, just to keep up with the Joneses. You're saving for a better reason. You're saving for your personal freedom. Your independence doesn't occur because you're driving a flashy car or because you're dressed for success. Your financial independence comes because you've earned an income and then you've saved it. You have it there in reserve to help you in times of emergency and to act as your war chest, to give you more leverage in life. Because once you have a significant nest egg, you can put that money to work for you. That's the third prong on our wealth spear. We want our assets to work for us. We want to be wise investors. And again, this is investing wisely in all aspects of our life. In the home we buy. Buying a home that not only meets our needs, for shelter and for community and for security, but buying a home in a good neighborhood that's going to appreciate in value over time. Like your income, as you want your income to more than keep up with inflation, you'd like to make a wise purchase on your home because it's going to be probably your biggest single investment of any durable good. You'd like to see that home not just keep up with inflation, but exceed inflation. Maybe you'll want to invest in other real estate opportunities. Or like myself, maybe you'll focus on the stock market. Or maybe you're more that entrepreneur that's going to invest more in your own personal business. Whatever it is, besides being that diligent saver, you got to find a way to put that money to work for you. You've got to be that wise investor. And it's all about the time value of money. The more money and the more time you have, the easier it's going to be to make that money grow. If you're 20 years old and you're getting just a very moderate rate of return, say like 3%, you've got to save about $1,000 a month to be a millionaire when you're in your early 60s. Now, if you don't start saving until you're 40, instead of just saving $1,000 a month like the 20-year-old, you got to save about $2,500 or $3,000 a month to be a millionaire when you're in your early 60s. That same time value applies to bulk sums of money. If you're 20 years old, you put $300,000 away, you let it sit there for 40 years. By the time you're 60, that can be $1 million, again, with just a moderate rate of a return, maybe like 3%. If you wait until you're 40 to start saving, you've got to have $500,000, right? Because you've only got 20 years left. It's going to take you, at 3% interest rate, it's going to take you 20 years to turn $500,000 into $1 million. So that's why it's important, if you haven't already started your wealthy lifestyle, you need to start it now. It's like planting a tree. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. Right along with being a wise investor, you have to be able to perceive value. We talk about that in wealth building principle number 4. This is not only evaluating stocks and companies. This is really important to be able to evaluate people, to be able to judge people's character, and then to be able to associate with those people and mirror your life to theirs, right? You want to act like people of good character. So when you can find someone of good character, you can perceive that value in someone. It's very important in the spouse you select, in the partners you select, in your friends, and the neighborhood you move into. If you want to see your future, you look at your friends. So you have to be able to perceive value in all things. Now, our 9 wealth building principles, it's a long list, but it can be done, it can be integrated into your life, and a person can literally start at zero, develop those skills in parallel, in harmony with each other, and become financially independent. Starting from ground zero within 20 years, you could go from rags to riches. Again, for those of you that don't believe it, I encourage you to go back, look at the immigrants, look at the countless immigrants that have come to America, those that came to America 100 years ago, those that came to America 10 years ago. Our country is a country that has a rich history where people can come here and become financially independent in 20 or 30 years. They come here with absolutely nothing. They can't speak the language. They don't have a formal education. They don't have business skills. And yet within 20 or 30 years, they're wealthy. It's because they've built their life around those 9 wealth building principles. They developed an income. They saved. They learned how to invest. They could identify value. For those of you that think you're starting too late, you think you're already behind the 8 ball, you don't have enough time value of money to work for you, don't give up. Just because wealth can't be achieved in your time doesn't mean it can't be achieved in future generations. That's part of the lifestyle. When we lead a lifestyle, we develop a certain culture. We pass that culture on to our children and our grandchildren. I'm financially independent today not because I did it all by myself, but because I had wonderful parents that instilled in me the ability to be able to earn an income and invest it wisely. And they likewise had fantastic parents that taught them. Now, neither my parents nor my grandparents had a great deal of financial wealth, but they had the wisdom. They were able to lead solid middle-class lives. Even though they never achieved what you would consider financial success, they were able to pass that wisdom on to me, and I was able to attain it for myself. Now, will I be able to pass it on to my children? I don't know. It's in their hands. I'm trying to raise responsible children that go out into the world with the knowledge how to make money and how to build wealth. And it's up to them to earn it on their own. So if you feel it's too late for you to make it to that pinnacle, if you have children or you have grandchildren, then don't despair because it can be multi-generational. If you start today and you start instilling that into your offspring, there's the hope that they can germinate that seed and in their lifetime, they can become financially independent. Best news that I have to share with you is that it's never too late. You see, the minute you start living this lifestyle, you can consider yourself wealthy. Because remember, wealth is not just about the money, it's about the freedom. It's about the independence. When you start living a more frugal lifestyle, that very day, you'll be able to feel the freedom. When you find a way to become more entrepreneurial, to be paid for results rather than just an hourly wage or a salary, when you achieve that, you'll feel the independence just flowing through your blood. When you cut up the credit cards and you eliminate that credit card debt or get rid of your car payment, you'll feel those shackles of slavery coming off, and that very day you'll be a little bit less a slave. And every day you walk down this path, every day that you develop and work on another wealth building skill, you'll become less and less a slave. And you'll find that you are a free man or a free woman, that you have the opportunity to improve yourself, to share your talents and abilities with the world. You'll be able to carry out the plan and the very reason that you were put on this earth. And that's why I say wealth is a lifestyle. So let's wrap up this episode by quickly reviewing the first 9 wealth building principles. Principle number 1, wealth is freedom. Wealth is not about having a lot of money. Wealth is about using that money to purchase your personal freedom and independence, to create a lifestyle that affords you freedom and liberty. Principle number 2, live debt-free. It's not about how much you're earning. It's about how much of that earnings that you're saving so that you can ultimately put those savings to work for you so that your money is working for you, not that you're working for your money. You need to learn how to break that consumerism addiction. Learn to live a thrifty, debt-free lifestyle. Principle number 3, production is the source of wealth. You don't get wealthy from your paycheck. You don't get wealthy from the government. You don't get wealthy from winning the lottery. You become wealthy by producing products and services that people want and need. You need to learn and implement the 3 phases of production. That's apprenticeship, building a business model, and developing investment income. Principle number 4, identify value. You can't become wealthy without being able to recognize and perceive value. That's value in people, that's value in property, that's value in stocks. Put your emotions aside. Focus on the cold hard facts. Look at the intrinsic value of something. Determine what it's worth today, and more importantly, try to accurately forecast what its future value is going to be worth. That's where you make the real windfall. Principle number 5, embrace technology and innovation. You can't fear change. You have to embrace it. The world's constantly developing, constantly changing, constantly growing. People that just try and hold on to their power or their position or onto the status quo, they'll eventually lose it. Technology and innovation is just not about computers and software, things like that. Technology is about technique. You have to constantly be looking for new ways to improve and better your technique, and work for and invest in companies that are improving their technique, providing new products and better services. You have to work for winners and you have to invest in winners. Forget about maintaining the status quo. Look for ways to help yourself and others have higher standards of living. Principle number 6, profit from trends. Once you build up your substantial nest egg, you just can't set it and forget it. You just can't put it in some bank or some 401k plan. You have to actively manage your money. You have to constantly be looking for that growth and opportunity. Don't buy and hold anything. The world is always evolving and changing. Invest in winners. Put your money in things that are going to have appreciating future value. Principle number 7, profit from nature. Study the sciences. Be aware of what's happening in Mother Nature. Be aware of the laws of nature. Be able to apply them. Be aware of the consequences. Also be a student of human nature. Understand how people and governments work. Fear and greed, love and hate, war and peace. This will help you be a better judge of character. Take this knowledge and find out ways to profit from it. Don't be afraid to make money off of a natural disaster. If a flood or a hurricane or an earthquake takes place, or if a country's ravaged by war, you can't do anything about it if you're poor. But you can determine where your assets are invested. So if you can find countries or companies that you can invest in to take advantage of these natural disasters or these man-made disasters, then do that. Then take that profit and do some good with it. Principle number 8, decrypt propaganda. You need to be aware that everyone's trying to sell you something, whether it's the government or big business or the local grocery store. Everyone's trying to take your money out of your pocket. Everything that you read or hear is messaged to you to try and affect either your spending habits or your behavior. Learn to decrypt that propaganda. Just as you do in navigation, learn to triangulate. Take multiple sources of information and triangulate to determine the truth. Principle number 9, be a giver. Remember, wealth is not just about the money. You're not accumulating that money just to hoard or just to spend on yourself. You're going to want to give some of that money away to do good things for your children, to do good things for your community, to do good things for strangers, people that you don't even know. And to get to the point where you're wealthy to begin with, you had to have been a giver. If you're working at a job or you're an entrepreneur, you have to be giving. You have to be providing those products and services that are of a higher value than what people are paying you. If people perceive you as giving them value, they'll be happy to part with their dollars. So always strive to work at 1, 2, or 3 levels above the level that you're being compensated for. You'll never find yourself out of work that way. And so you see, if you implement those 9 principles in your life, you'll know why the 10th principle is wealth is a lifestyle. So take these principles, embrace them, learn them, act upon them, build your life around them. You'll become prosperous, you'll become wealthy, and more important, you'll become free and independent. Now I know this is a lot to absorb. Go back and listen to these 10 principles over and over again. Share them with your loved ones. Get them on board. Don't try and walk alone to wealth. Take your friends and family along with you. You'll get there a lot quicker that way. I know you can do it, and I encourage you to try. This wraps up our discussion for today. As always, I appreciate you listening. Please visit us at wealthsteading.com. You can leave comments there, or you can leave questions that you'd like to hear answered on future episodes. Good luck on your travel down the road to wealth and prosperity. I wish you the best of returns. This is John Pugliano.